So we're going to talk about how you can better manage hybrid cloud. So I understand that you guys have a great tool for us. It's called OMS. So what is OMS, Tiander?
So OMS stands for Operations Management Suite. So it's literally a suite of all kinds of components which is supporting our hybrid cloud story. So it consists of business continuity, disaster recovery. It has automation technologies in there. It has monitoring and analytics technologies in there. So you monitor your system, you can interrogate your system, you have automation to automate all kinds of tasks, and we protect your assets by supporting you in a site recovery, disaster recovery scenario, but also simply a server backup. So you're good to go when a failure hits you. You can fail over to Azure, and all those four components, let's call it four components, are all correlated with one another.
Depending upon what you're doing and lighting up in there, if you're wanting to onboard your existing System Center operations management servers sitting in your private cloud, it's a matter of about 5 minutes. You can onboard your virtual machines that are sitting in your private cloud. Those will go. The data will start going up within hours, and you'll start to see that data up there fairly quickly and be able to analyze that. Tiander will go into the details around log analytics and some of the other pieces there.
You say up there. You're saying in the Microsoft Cloud, the portal?
Yes.
Azure?
Up in Azure itself. So OMS actually lives in Azure. The framework lives up in Azure, but it's truly a hybrid cloud management framework to be able to allow you to manage your on-premise servers, both Linux and Windows, as well as your servers up in the cloud. So whether they be in AWS or in Azure, for example, or in a search cloud.
Well, Jim and Tiander, I hear a lot of things I like. I hear hybrid cloud. I hear private cloud. I hear Azure. I hear AWS. I hear backup recovery. So I want to see it, and I want to see it right now.
Awesome.
Sure. Okay, folks, we are now in Microsoft Operations Management Suite. So this is the portal you guys are seeing. So what you're looking at are solution packs, and those are predefined views and queries we've created for you. So based on the solution packs, you can see several components supporting your hybrid environment. I can monitor my Active Directory environment. I can have my malware assessment monitored. If I slide to the right, I can see capacity planning coming in. I can see changes in my environment, and I can see a bunch of others which are related to all the rich and information which is coming in. So OMS has a couple of solution packs which will support you in your daily operations. For example, best practices is one component of OMS. If I click on the Active Directory assessment tile, this will give you all kind of best practices we've learned from support calls from MCS, our consulting organization, and our support organization. And this is an example how I'm monitoring my domain controller. And when I click on a link, all these information pieces are right in front of you. You can click on it. You can see, for example, that my domain controller is missing an inbound replication, which makes sense because I only have one domain controller in here. I don't have a replication partner, so that's a bad thing. So we will have a bunch of those solution packs in OMS for SQL, for example, to make sure that we help you in the best practices. Now, for those.
Tiander, just real quick, what's really neat about that is it's not something that the customer has to go and install or update software for. We just continuously update our cloud offering, and
that's correct.
That's just extended to them for their usage. Now, I am curious about one thing. I noticed in your URL you use X-Wing. You know I'm a Star Wars fan, so I'm like X-Wing. But just curious, how do customers get to this page?
So if you want to try this out, there's a one simple URL you need to remember, which is called Microsoft microsoft.com/OMS. This is how you get there. And it has a way for you to subscribe, create a new, what we call a workspace for free. So you can try it out for free. Just click on this link, sign up, and you're up and running within minutes. So
Awesome.
that's a way to try it out. And we have all the functionality available for you for free to try out.
So Lavin is going to take us through end-to-end how you get started with automation, because if you've never used this before, it's important that you start off on the right foot. So take it away. Help us understand what we need to know in terms of getting started.
Sure. So OMS automation is a service that we provide to be able to help our customers automate their very repetitive manual tasks, both in their data center as well as cloud. Mm-hmm. The service is actually available through the Azure portal,
right?
Which I'll be going into in a few minutes, or through the OMS dashboard. OMS is the Operations Management Suite,
yeah.
Where we have numerous services for the customers, which includes the automation, and we also have log analytics and backup and recovery, multiple services. I'm sure we have a lot of videos which delve into the individual services in detail.
Exactly, yeah. The two previous parts of the course, so cloud-enabled protection and the log analytics, all cool stuff, and we covered all of those different solutions. But obviously, it's evolving and changing all the time. But if we focus in on automation, how do we get started?
So this is the. So I'm going to go into my demo right now.
Right.
So this is the OMS main page, which you can get to by going to microsoft.com/OMS. And if you scroll down, you have the high-level services, mm-hmm. And the IT automation is our automation service. You can click on this, and it will take you to the dashboard.
Right. Once you sign in,
once you sign in, and you with your Microsoft account, and then here you can see the various services offered by the OMS, mm-hmm. and here on the left you can see the automation. And this will give you a quick summary of the number of runbooks that you have, which is our automation script, which is powered by PowerShell, and it has a set of commandlets and modules. And then the jobs which are run. So the jobs are basically the executables that you have scheduled,
right?
So that the runbooks execution time is actually captured here.
So you get a good historical look at what's happened.
Yes, and the number of runbooks you have executed and the status of those jobs.
Right. So it's a kind of simple dashboard, but it just gives you that high level of what you need to know.
Yes.
And we'll explore a number of these things later on, like we'll understand building runbooks and so on later in the course. So don't worry if you're thinking right now, I don't really understand what a runbook is. We'll explore it a little bit in this getting started, but in more depth a bit later on as well.
Yes, and so getting into the management of the automation, you can either click on the management button, which is right here, or you could go to the Azure portal,
right?
Which is basically portal.azure.com. And there, if you click on Browse, so the very first step in getting to use your automation service is creation of an automation account.
Okay.
The automation account is more like a container, if you look at it, which has all your runbooks, your assets, your configuration settings, and everything else that you need for the execution of your runbook.
Okay, not to be confused with the Docker container, which is completely different.
Yeah, this is more like a storage box.
Yeah, fair enough. Good analogy.
And then if you click on automation accounts, so once you're logged in with your subscription, the portal will basically list all the accounts that you have created.
Right.
And I have quite a few, as you can see here. And for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to show how to create a new one.
Right.
So you click on Add here, and you enter a name. This has to be a unique name that you haven't entered before. So I'm going to say demo account.
Very unique.
Yeah, it is. And either you can create an existing resource group. Again, I'm going to assume that this is for a first-time user who's not used automation service before, so we're going to create a new resource group.
Okay.
And to avoid confusion, I'm going to give the same name. You don't have to give a same name. It can be anything that.
Right. You can choose something more exciting if you want.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you can choose, so here, looks like I do have.
Oh, somebody must already have one.
Yes, so, which is a good thing. It validates and lets you know earlier.
Nice.
Okay. Okay.
There we go. Good
And then-
validation.
And then you have to select a location. Now, this doesn't really affect the functionality per se, but if you choose a region where the resources are located, it's really quick and faster
So
access.
local to your geography perhaps would be more effective.
Yes.
Right.
Now we have a new feature in our automation account creation, which is the creation of a service principal. That's what you have right below here. Service principal is actually Azure Run As account. That is a standard authentication method. It's a certificate-based authentication method that allows your runbook to access your resources and enables them to execute the management tasks against Active Directory. And we do give you a choice to select if you want us to create one for you on your behalf at the time of account creation, because it makes the whole process seamless and you already have an authentication method that allows your runbooks to access your resources from.
Okay.
But you can choose to select no, in which case you either have to go create one using the PowerShell commandlets in your runbooks, or you could basically use your credentials. Which is not recommended.
Okay.
Because this is a more secure method.
And there's a link there if you want to do want to do a little bit more about why that's important.
Yes, and this link here will tell you more about what a service principal is and how to create one using your PowerShell commandlets and what benefits it has.
Nice.
And if you choose to pin it to your dashboard for ease of access the next time, you can always select this. And then we say create. So you can follow the status here. Right now it's submitting deployment. And so this is a two-step process. It's going to create an automation account for you, and it's going to create a service principal. And in the meanwhile, I can always go back to the one that I've created. It takes a few seconds. This is the one that I've already created earlier today.
With the unique name?
With the unique name, yes. So here, you can see that what I meant by saying it's a box, right? It has your runbooks. It's a one place where you can look at all your runbooks, all your jobs, which are scheduled runbooks. And then you have your hybrid worker groups. Because now, in addition to actually helping you automate tasks in your cloud infrastructure, we also enable you to use the service on your data center.
Yeah, and we're going to be covering that in later modules as well,
Yes, and then this is where the assets are. And this has a list of your schedules, modules, certificates, and everything else. Now, if we go back.
Throughout the course of all the modules today, we'll be building up. I'm sure we'll see more of these populated, because obviously a lot of them are zero at this point because it's a fresh account. But,
yes. So here are the notifications. So the deployments have succeeded. You have a new service principal as well as a new Azure Run As account. And then you select on demo account here, which is the one we created. And then you can see that we have one runbook. The one runbook is basically a tutorial that gets created at the time of creation of the account. So here, you can also see the history of the jobs that have been executed in the last 7 days. And you click on this, you can actually go to the detailed set of jobs that have been executed.
And green is healthy.
And green is healthy, yes.
Nice.
And you have which ones you've suspended, which ones have failed, and you can take actions based on those.
Okay.
And then in addition, you also have source control integration. You can connect it to your repository. I'm not going to go into the details here, but you can connect to your private repository that you have, which right now we have Visual Studio TFS integration and GitHub integration that you can go into. Now, let's go back to the one that we have created. So we have one runbook, which is the Azure automation tutorial. This is the status of the tutorial that I ran. We have no errors, and it ran successfully. I'll go into the details of what this actually does.
Now we're exploring the specific runbook itself.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is the Azure automation tutorial runbook. And here you can see that we have the ability to either execute a runbook from here, or you can edit an existing runbook, and you can make changes to it. You have the library on the left. You can add commandlets from the available imported modules that you have in your account. I can quickly show you how to import a module or a runbook before we end this. So here, this runbook is a very basic tutorial. What it does is it connects to your subscription, and it queries for all the resource groups that are in your account.
Okay.
Now, since the service principal that we create is basically for your entire subscription, and we give a contributor access by default.
Right.
And so it will query all the accounts that are in my subscription, and it will return the list of all the resource groups that are in my subscription. And we have a test pane here, which you could click to make sure that your code is fine, your syntax is fine.
Right.
And if you have any input parameters in your runbooks, here is where you enter them. And the test pane, you can actually say, I can either execute it here to make sure that everything is fine, or I can go and execute it there. So I'm going to click start.
So you're essentially kicking off the runbook. It doesn't take any input parameters at this point. It's just...
No, so this particular runbook has no input parameters.
Right.
We're just making a query into the subscription to make sure what resource groups we have.
Right.
As you can see, it's cured. So what it does is you can make sure that your runbooks are authored right, and you can make sure that it gets executed right. You can make sure that your input parameters and risk settings are all fine here before scheduling your job.
Right. And then you would run it on a recurring schedule. Maybe not this runbook specifically, but your normal runbooks you would run once a day or whenever it's required.
Yes,
right.
Yes. So you can schedule it at a particular time, particular day. You can make it recurring.
Okay. What's going on here on the right-hand side? So it's logged into Azure. It's pulling.
Yeah. So the bottom pane actually shows you what we log.
Okay.
So this is a test pane, right? But if you look at your actual job that is run, this information can be found in the logs.
Right. Gotcha.
And you can click on the logs and you'll see exactly this. So this gives you a list of whatever tasks it's doing. So here it's checking the environment. It's checking the demo account type, which is basically it's checking my accounts, my automation accounts in my subscription. And you can see that I have multiple accounts, which I have a demo account, I have a demo account new, and then it's showing me the resources in each of these accounts that I have.
Okay.
And it basically, it lists every resources in the resource group that I have in all my accounts.
Nice.
So that's what the tutorial does.
Okay.
So now that we know the tutorial is good, you can basically go back to your editing pane. So you can either publish or you can revert to the published version. Since we didn't make any changes, I'm just going to say revert to publish.
And by publishing, you're essentially saying, yep, this is good to go for everybody who...
Yes, it's more like checking in your code, right? You're saying I'm publishing it on cloud, so it's available for me.
Yep.
Anytime I can schedule a job, just the version that's going to run.
Okay.
And here you have options for scheduling. And you can link up existing schedule to your runbook, or you can modify your run settings. And then once you create the schedule, this is where your schedule is coming. And here you can add a schedule as well.
Right.
It takes you to the same thing, yes.
Yeah, everything's pretty simply laid out and helps you get started for sure.
Yes. And here, once you, here you have the list of your jobs that you've completed. And when I click on this, you see all logs here. And basically, you have the same thing that you saw in the bottom pane right over there, and along with the timestamp, and tells you if something goes wrong, you'll be able to find out where you went wrong, and you can go fix them.
Right.
And this one has this is output here that we see, but sometimes you might have an output which is a file or something else, and then that will be shown here.
Right. Nice.
So it's very, we have tried to make it as simple as possible for the user to be able to create an automation account, play with it, create their own runbooks. We do have other detailed videos that the users can check to see how they can author. We have multiple ways of authoring a runbook. We have a textual editor, we have a graphical editor, and then we have tutorials on using the desired state configurations and hybrid runbook workers and everything else.
Nice.
So I hope the users are able to just get started, play around with the feature, and explore the other areas.
Nice. And all of those things that you called out there around building runbooks, desired state configuration, how you invoke runbooks, we're going to be covering in a variety of modules as part of this course. So that brings us to the end of this particular module, getting started, signing up. So just starting to kick the tires and understand just some of the key building blocks that make up OMS automation. And going forward into the next module, we're actually going to start to introduce how you start to build runbooks, initially with PowerShell and PowerShell workflow, and then moving on to more graphical tools as well. So stay with us for that. Lavanya, thank you for your time and the demo. And yeah, we'll see you again in the next module.
Thank you, Matt.
Hello and welcome to this Microsoft Virtual Academy as we continue our look at hybrid IT management, specifically focused on automation. Now, in the previous module, I introduced hybrid IT management on the whole and looked at each of the key buckets briefly and what you can expect and what we've covered on previous courses within the series. But now we want to focus in a little bit more specifically on understanding what automation is all about within the Operations Management Suite and what it means for you before we dive into the technology in later modules. And to help me do that, Eamon's come along. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hey, thanks, Matt, for having me.
Tell us what you do at Microsoft.
Yeah, so I'm a Principal Program Manager, and I work on the Operations Management Suite, mostly focused on the configuration and automation service that we're going to talk about today.
Nice, and you actually manage a lot of the speakers that we'll have on the course today.
I do, yeah. So I'm the lead for all of the automation capabilities inside the service, and previously I worked on different System Center components, including Orchestrator, Service Management, Automation.
Cool, and people can get in touch if you're not familiar with the team, generically speaking, not just individuals, the whole team, on Twitter at the @AzureAutomation Twitter handle. So great way to get in touch with the team, give your feedback, talk about the technology, and follow key announcements. So what do we need to know really about automation in the context of OMS? Bring us up to speed.
Yeah, so when you think about the life cycle of your infrastructure and your applications, everything you have to do from all the way to how your infrastructure is built out, then how you might configure it, how you monitor it, how you protect it, how you secure it, all of those different things you have to do across your life cycle, not just on your infrastructure, but on your application. We had a lot of good tooling inside of System Center that really allowed you to do these things on your on-premises environment. But as we go forward, a lot of our customers are starting to go into a hybrid world where they're moving a lot of their resources either up into Azure, or they may be moving into third-party clouds as well. Mm-hmm. And so as they start to build out all of those requirements around the full life cycle of your infrastructure and application, they still exist. And so what we want to be able to do is, how do you solve that problem as you move your resources across that hybrid world to still give you the power of management, so you have a single place that you can consistently manage all of the different phases of your life cycle.
Right.
And so that's really where configuration and automation plays a key role. Obviously in some parts of the life cycle, it plays a really major role. And you see as you go through some of the modules later on, like as you're doing the build of your environment and how do you set it up correctly and configure it the right way, through the configuration of your application and orchestrating how that larger system gets deployed and integrated into different systems. But even as you go all the way through the rest of the life cycle, like monitoring, protection, all those great things that Operations Management Suite gives you, configuration and automation actually plays a key role in there too. Because you might be monitoring something and you realize there's a bunch of alerts happening and you have to go take some remediation action to go fix it. And that it might be, escalated to a service desk. It might be go reset a service in there, collect log files. All of those actions that you need to take during that part of the life cycle, that's really where the automation configuration power comes in.
Right.
And that goes all the way up through, protection, security, a very similar thing. You might realize you're missing security updates on the environment. That's what security analysis will tell you. How do I go and set those, updates and install those security? Again, that's where automation and configuration takes its role.
Right.
So it's all the way through the life cycle, but in some parts of it we really specialize, obviously, and we spend a lot more time on, particularly around the building configuration.
Right, so building, deploying new workloads, deploying new servers for workloads and so on. Again, whether they exist on-prem, whether they exist in the cloud or across both in a hybrid.
That's the exact same thing. It's really about the life cycle doesn't really change. You just have a lot more to do if you're an IT administrator now. And so how do you really figure out, as I bring more of my resources across the clouds, and now I'm in this hybrid state, but I'm still responsible for all the compliance. I'm still responsible for the control and the actions that are taken across those. And what tooling, do we have inside of System Center and Operations Management Suite to give you that ability to actually, as your organization grows and moves into these clouds, that you can actually move from an IT administration standpoint as well and take advantage of all these great new tools we're offering up inside of Operations Management Suite.
With automation specifically, it saves you, if you're an admin, it saves you so much time because you are doing those manual tasks. Many of the tasks that are associated with each of those areas you outlined on the graphic around securing things, protecting things, monitoring things, anything that I can do to not have to do that thing first thing every Monday or the last thing every Friday, if I can automate all of that, it saves me a huge amount of time and I can actually be more valuable to the business going to do other things while the systems manage themselves.
Exactly. I mean, one of the promises of the cloud really was you got this, high level of SLA, but you also got things on demand. And that's kind of the expectation that, IT departments have been really trying to get to over the last few years. And we gave them a lot of tooling in System Center to allow that. But, the clouds have really taken to the next level. Your end users now expect when a virtual machine should just, when they want a virtual machine, they just get it. Yep. And they want it to configure the way, they just get it. So there's just really strong demand on IT to actually deliver the SLAs under a controlled way, because you can't just, offer everything out and then not have the management functionality on top of it. Because if you need to get it backed up, something happens, how do you ensure that's happening? Is it monitored? Are the controls in place? All of those things really require management tools that work both against on-premises, but also work in these clouds as you're moving resources around.
So if we drill in a little bit more depth into what the Operations Management Suite provides, I think we've got a slide that helps us illustrate some more of those. Talk us through some of the key points here. Like, for instance, the extending the investments you've already got in PowerShell is a big one.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the things we really, kept in mind as we started to build out the automation service was there's a huge investment and huge ecosystem around PowerShell over the last, 10 years almost, where people have invested a lot of time and a lot of resources into integrating and automating all their on-premises assets to get today. And so as we built out the service, we actually built it on top of PowerShell. Right. And so in some ways, it's like PowerShell as a service is one component of our automation service. So all of those investments you've done, you can literally pick up that PowerShell scripts you've written or the desired state configuration now as it comes out. You can pick up those, bring them into our service, and then you gain all the benefits of, high availability, all reliability, scale, because you don't have to manage those anymore on premises. The automation service takes care of that for you.
But if you still do have an investment in System Center, for instance, like Orchestrator, which you worked on, there is a path for people. There is, it's still useful technology.
Oh, definitely. I think what we're seeing a lot of our customers end up doing is they have Orchestrator in place or service management automation if they're using the Azure pack. Yeah. And those, they've built up a lot of processes, and so we have migration tools. So if they decide they want to move those things forward, they can actually export everything out of Orchestrator, including their integration packs, custom runbooks they've written. All of those can be brought forward into the automation service. But not that. What we're seeing a lot of our customers, not only are they in a hybrid world, associated with their VMs and their databases, they're in a hybrid world with their management tools as well. So you can keep your System Center investments there. And then as you start to build out new automation, you can build it into the cloud, but they can talk seamlessly together. Right. So you can actually keep your kind of existing processes in Orchestrator if you wanted to, and call them from the cloud and vice versa. And then over time, as you move more and more of your investments, we have the tooling to actually bring those forward, and you don't have to relearn any of the tools. That graphical authoring experience you have inside of Orchestrator today is now available in the cloud. And that PowerShell authoring experience you had inside of service management automation is available in the automation service as well. Right. And so it's kind of a continuum we wanted to make sure, because there's been so many people invested on it over the last few years, and I worked on a lot of those things myself.
Right, so it's not only an investment in a continuation in technology, but also skills and learning, helping people transition.
That's right. We don't want to have to relearn everything to take advantage of the cloud. We just want to take advantage of the cloud, but bring all that knowledge forward that you've already done.
Yeah. So where would somebody go to get started? What would be your recommendation there in terms of, would they just go to the portal?
Yeah, let me demo over, just show you where to get started if you just want to learn a little bit about automation inside of the OMS suite.
Great, cool.
Okay, so I'm actually going to go to, you've probably seen this, but this is the Operations Management Suite. Yep. And this is where you kind of, have all those things we talked about previously. But one of the things I'll call out here is the automation tile. So there's an automation solution that you can click into. And here we'll show you, your runbooks and your jobs and other things you might want to do. But just for now, I'm going to click on Manage. And what this does, it brings you over into the Azure portal where the automation service lives. And you can see I have this ARM account that I've created, and I've linked into the Operations Management Suite, the larger tools. Inside of here, you can see we're going to go into all the different modules, how you'd actually build up your runbooks, take advantage of configuration. But one thing I want to call out here is it's very simple to get started. You could just click on plus new, create an automation account. Yeah. But the one thing that is worth calling out here is it's actually very easy to get started because we have a pricing tier that is free and for basic. And so if you're free and you just want to try it out and you say maybe you're a heavy System Center user, or you're just trying to figure out management and you're leveraging Azure, how can I go in, get started, learn all the different capabilities we have? We've actually given a free service. So you get 500 minutes. So when you're running all this automation, you can actually run 500 minutes a month, and then you get another 500 minutes next month. Or if you're trying to learn configuration, we'll give you 5 nodes. So you can actually build out your nodes, understand how it all works, And then eventually, as you decide it's going to work for you, you can transition into the OMS pricing or, the basic pricing we have inside of Azure.
Right, so 500 minutes is still quite a lot of time. Bearing in mind some of these runbooks only take a few seconds to run.
I know, a lot of them might take it. You can do a lot of good things in 500 minutes. You can also do a lot of damage. So, one thing I will, it is automation.
Yeah.
But you're right, 500 minutes, I mean, you can stop all your virtual machines. Because we support, PowerShell workflow and other things, you could do things in parallel.
Yeah.
And so you could probably stop all of your servers, under a minute.
Right.
And that's only 1 minute gone.
Exactly. So just so I understand as well, does the 500 minutes include test runs, or is it just when you start a run?
It includes test runs as well.
Okay.
Yeah, because the way we do our testing, which is good, is that we actually emulate exactly what you would do in the production, so that you're guaranteed if it worked in the test environment, that it'll work in the production environment as well.
So it's 500 minutes of runbook time. Couple of 5 DSC nodes, is that right? We'll learn more about DSC in later modules as well towards the end of the course, so don't worry if what's a DSC node, you will learn, trust me. But it's for simplicity's terms, it's 5 server nodes that you can manage with DSC.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you remove one and you add another one, then we'll just count 5 overall.
Right.
And so you're not locked just into the machines you initially create.
Right.
You can add and remove them as you go.
Cool. Well, that's more than enough for people to be able to kick the tires, for sure. I mean, 500 minutes, the 5 nodes if you choose to use the DSC component there. So yeah, plenty for getting. And the basic tier is very cost effective, still great in terms of how you start to automate. And remember that the operations management suite isn't just automation. You're getting a whole host of other capabilities within OMS that you can utilize as well within their own specific pricing brackets and so on. So overall, as a suite, incredibly powerful.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt.
So that's a bit about understanding OMS and from an automation perspective. Now, in the next modules, we're going to start to look more deeply at the technology, specifically how you get started. So in the next module, we're going to look at how you start to create the Azure automation account, specific run as and service accounts, and have a look at some of the building blocks that make up the service before we proceed and start building runbooks for real. So you're going to learn a lot there. So stick with us as we continue our look at hybrid IT management focused on automation. Hello, welcome back to this Microsoft Virtual Academy, all about hybrid IT management, specifically focusing in on automation. I'm still Matt McSpirit, and in this module, we're going to be building on what we've learned in the previous couple of modules where we've introduced OMS or Azure automation. We've shown you how to get started. Now we're going to dive into that little bit more depth on how you actually start to build some of the runbooks that power and provide the automation capabilities for you. And to help us do that, I'm joined by Chris Sanders. Chris, welcome.
Hey, Matt.
Good to have you. And tell us about what you do at Microsoft.
I've been at Microsoft since 2000, and I started out working in Windows Live and then Windows, and now I'm in System Center.
Nice.
And I've been working on Orchestrator, the automation piece in System Center, and now we've moved that into the cloud, into Azure Automation, which is what we're going to talk about today.
And the future is the cloud, as you all know. Now, you've done a number of speaking gigs before, so you've been on stage at Ignite, and there's some links in the slides for you as well. If you want to check out Chris's other sessions, he's got loads of, he did one with Scott Hanselman on Channel 9, so loads of cool stuff there as well. Now, let's get into the weeds. Let's start to look at how we build runbooks with PowerShell. Now, loads of you are familiar with PowerShell, obviously, but you may not have used it in this context. So, Chris, are we going to look at slides or are we going to look at demo?
So what I'm going to do today, Matt, is I'm going to give you a demo. We're going to build this one, then we're going to build another one. But the demo today, the starters, we're going to build a textual runbook, a PowerShell runbook, and we're going to make one that's actually useful that you could use in your IT processes all the time, which is to send an email using your Outlook.com account.
Cool.
It's a simple little runbook, but it's very useful.
Great. So let's get started. What do we got on the screen here?
What we have on the screen here, Matt, is the new Azure portal. And what we're going to do is we're going to drill into the automation accounts that we have, because that's where we're going to build our runbooks, is in the Azure automation account. I'm going to go in. I have a bunch of accounts here that I use for testing, but I'm going to use this automation test account right here. And the first thing you see when you drill into your automation account is you come to the dashboard where all of the assets and things that you're going to need to actually build a runbook are available for you. Of course, we're going to be working in the runbooks later today, but then at some point we're going to be looking at the jobs, which is when you actually run a runbook, it turns into a job that you can then look at. We're going to look at the assets here, which we're going to look at a credential we're going to use. I just want to point out that also within automation, you can not only do the process automation, which is with runbooks, but you can also do configuration runbooks using desired state configuration.
Yep.
And I think you've already had modules on that.
We've got Joe Levy coming in later today to cover that as well. So, yeah.
Right. And another one I just want to point out is hybrid worker groups, is that Azure Automation can work either in Azure or you can work on-premise. And you can run your runbooks on your own computer in your own data center if you want to. So it's part of our hybrid story.
Nice.
Just point that out.
Yeah, and we've got Ravi talking about that later on as well. So
Exactly.
covering all the bases.
Cover it all.
Yep.
So let me just point out one asset here. In the assets, these are things that you use to complement your runbooks or even to actually build your runbooks. So one is, I just want to point out here, we're going to use a credential today. And one of the credentials we're going to use is Automation Live credential. So this is my credential for this automate everything at outlook.com Outlook account that I've set up for this demo here. And it's going to contain the credential for the runbook that we're going to create. Other ones that come in are like connections. So if you actually create an automation account today, we automatically build a service principal for you. And we set up this Azure Run As connection. And then when I talk about our graphical runbook, building that in our next module, we'll use this Azure Run As connection to authenticate with Azure so we can work against Azure resources.
Nice.
Modules is a hugely important one. These are all the PowerShell modules that are available to your runbooks. There are some that we create for you when you create an automation account. We provide them automatically in the system. For instance, here's most of the Azure modules, and very shortly we're going to have all of the Azure modules by default in here, and we'll keep them updated for you.
Right.
And there's a bunch of the core PowerShell modules as well that are available to you. And one of the promises of Azure Automation is that you can very easily extend it by adding your own modules in that either you create yourself or that you found on the internet. You can import them in. We also have a gallery, the PowerShell gallery. So Azure Automation is very extensible. If you want to work against any system out there, there's a PowerShell module for it, and you can import it into Azure Automation and use it to build your runbooks.
Nice, and Beth's going to be talking about the gallery in more depth and showing some of that as well later on. So.
Yep.
All cool stuff.
So let's go back then to our runbook then. And what I want to do is switch very quickly over here to the production account where I already have this runbook created. The runbook we're going to create today sends a simple email through the outlook.com SMTP server, okay? Right. And I'm just going to show you how to build this using the textual authoring tool. So we'll refer back to this as we go along.
Okay.
Let me go back to test here. So the first thing we want to do is we'll go click in here to the runbooks. And you can see there's already a few runbooks here that we're going to use. And also when you first create an automation account, you automatically get a couple of tutorial runbooks. So you don't start with a blank slate in Azure Automation. There's going to be a couple of tutorials here that help you get going.
Right, and there is a good amount of documentation actually on Azure.com as well for people to learn about.
Absolutely, there's all kinds of content. Also, you can see here there's a gallery which I'll talk about in our next module where you can pull in runbooks and modules.
Great.
So let's just add a runbook in this case. We're going to create one, and I'm going to call this send. Whoops. I'm going to call it Send Mail Live because we're sending mail through our live account.
Yep.
And the runbook type here, this is interesting. So we have 4 basic types of runbooks. We have PowerShell runbooks, which is what we're going to create today, which is a PowerShell script, native PowerShell script runbook. We also have graphical runbooks, which I'm going to talk about in our next module, which are graphical runbooks based on native PowerShell, but you build them in a graphical sense. We also have PowerShell workflow runbooks, which are based on PowerShell workflow. And the reason you'd want to use native PowerShell versus PowerShell workflow, the basic advantage of PowerShell workflow is if you need to checkpoint your runbook for any reason,
right.
Which would mean that you have a process where you might be reaching out to a system and sometimes it doesn't respond, and you got to wait for it to respond, and you might have to checkpoint your runbook and try again.
Right.
But you want your runbook to start from that checkpoint. That's the reason you do PowerShell workflow. There are some there are some disadvantages to PowerShell workflow. It's a little bit harder to author, and it also starts up a little bit more slowly because it has to compile itself.
Right.
But overall, we still give you this capability to checkpoint your runbooks if you want to.
Great. Nice.
But also we have graphical PowerShell workflow runbooks as well. But we really encourage folks to do most of their authoring within the PowerShell world because it's easier and things start really, really fast. So we'll create a PowerShell type here. This is one where we're going to send a mail using live. I'm going to click OK, and it's going to now creating the runbook, and it's going to immediately go into the editing phase.
Nice. There we go.
So, okay. So now we're into the authoring pane here, and there's a couple of main parts for the textual authoring. One is that we have a library over here. And over here you can see all the different commandlets that were in your system. So when we went into that modules area of assets, those are all the ones that are showing up here.
Right.
And you have now access to all of these to use within your runbook here.
They're grouped by module, essentially.
Right. You have all the Azure. This is all the Azure Classic modules. You have all the Azure RM ones here. And the one we're going to use today is in down this PowerShell utility. And this is where the send mail.
Quite a long list.
It's a very long list. Where is it? Send mail message. Okay. And in this case, if it has multiple parameter sets, you'll see that. In this case, there's only one. So we'll right-click on that. We'll say Add to Canvas. And you can see here now that we've added, this is like the core, this is the core commandlet we want to use to be able to send a mail message.
Right.
Now, there's all, what we do here to make it easy for you is we not only put in the commandlet signature, but all of the possible parameters to that as well.
Right.
So we're not going to need all these. So I'm going to delete some of these out of here.
I was going to ask you, you see that's an incredibly quick way to get started just by
exactly
into the canvas. And
exactly, it's in there. Now you see what's needed. Okay, right out of the box, and then you can go in and you can just delete the ones that you don't need and keep the ones that you need.
Right.
And I think that we're cool here. So here's this. So I'm going to go back, just instead of typing all the stuff in, I'm going to go back here. And I'm just going to copy this piece here, which I've done this already before. I'll copy this piece in. And then we'll go back. And
this just saves you a bit of time.
This is saving time for this demo here, just to show folks. So there we've cut this down. Now we have the basic message we want to send. But when you're creating this, now you look at this and you go, okay, we have a body. That's going to be the body of the message. We need a credential. So we're going to have to authenticate with the live SMTP server.
Yep.
We're going to need a from address. We're also going to need the name of the SMTP server. In this case, it's smtp.live.com. You can find this on the internet.
Yep.
There's examples out there about how to send emails to...
So you've hard-coded that one, though, rather than it being a variable like...
Exactly. So that's part of the thinking right now is we're going to determine what's hard-coded and what's going to be a parameter that we're going to need to put in.
Nice.
A subject and a to address, and this use SSL is there because we need it. SMTP.live.com requires it to be through SSL.
Right.
So you can see here we're going to need a credential, and there's going to be some things that if we're creating this runbook to be used as part of another runbook, you're going to send an email. You're always going to have a different body. You're going to have a different subject, and you're going to send it to different folks, right? So the core parameters, we're going to have our body, to, and the subject.
So an example would be perhaps you have an automation runbook that creates a VM, and at the end of that runbook triggers this runbook to email the author of that VM to tell them it's completed.
Totally, that's
Something
it.
like that. And
exactly.
the details and the subject and everything and the body of the message are related to the fact they've just created a VM. So.
That's a really good use case for this because you're running these runbooks to do some automation task, and then you want to get notification afterwards that it's been done, or you want to see the status of it.
Right.
You can use this to send yourself an email saying, "Hey, this is done, and here was the results from that."
Great. Okay. Cool.
So we're going to need a couple of things here. One is we're going to need to set up some parameters. Okay, so this is the core way you start setting up parameter sets in here. And another is we're going to need a credential in here, right? So you notice here that, so this is an example of how this authoring tool is useful. Is there is some limited IntelliSense in this tool. It basically remembers all of the different strings that are in the canvas set right now. So if I just hit enter right now, then I get that cred just like that. So one of the things we're going to do for this credential here now is I'm going to go back here and I'm going to pull the credential from the library. So again, we have this library and it has commandlets. It has other runbooks. If I wanted to use a runbook in here, I could pull one of these other runbooks in and use that in here if it made sense. And using runbooks and creating smaller runbooks is a great way to modularize during authoring. If you have code that is being reused, just like when you're coding anything, you want to modularize it. And that's an example of the send mail one, is that every time you send an email in a runbook, you don't want to rewrite that code, so you want to modularize it.
Yeah,
and that's where and that's where runbooks really get useful.
And easier to maintain if they're smaller. Rather than a 1,000-line runbook, you've got lots of 30, 40-line runbooks that are related.
And you've created it, you've tested it, it works, you just set it aside, now you can just use it.
Nice.
So another very useful aspect of the authoring pane here is that we have access to all the assets in the system that you can pull in commandlets that will get those assets for you. You can get variables that might be in your system, you can get connections, you can get these credentials, and you can pull in certificates. In our case, we want to pull in some credentials, and we're going to use this automation live credential right here. So you can see what it's done here is it's used this commandlet right here called get automation PS credential, and the name of it is automation live credential. So it's basically already set this up to pull in that credential. We're going to set it to the cred variable here, and then we're going to be able to use it down here. We're going to pass it directly as the credential to send mail message, and we're also going to use the cred.username, which is a property. So the credential has a username and a password in it. And the password is encrypted. And the from, we're going to just say where it's from this cred.username. It could be from someone else if you wanted to.
So in advance, ahead of time, you've set up this credential, this automation live credential, and you've actually hard-coded the credentials in there. So it's almost like an account that you could then give to people who don't have perhaps as much privilege, and they could use it without needing to know the specifics of the credential. Is that right?
Exactly. That's one of the. Let me go back here. I meant to talk about that before. Let me go back and talk about these that credential just for a second. We'll go back into assets. We'll go into the credentials here. Someone else could have set this up. It doesn't have to be the person who created the runbook. It could have been someone with admin privileges. And then in here, you can see that it has a username and it has a password in it, all right? So this is automate everything at Outlook.com. I created this for this demo. I set up a password, and I created this credential for it.
Right.
So then when this gets passed to the runbook, it's going to have a username and it's going to have a password as part of it. So it's going to be a full PowerShell credential when it gets into the runbook.
You could share that with your users who need not specifically the details of the credential, but the actual asset.
That's right.
Yep.
So let's go back and keep editing this. You can see that that runbook is in a new state. That's because we just created it. It's never been published. Here's an example of this log in Azure is one that's been published before, but now it's in an edit state. So it just kind of shows you there what the state is. Let's go back to edit this again. So we've got almost all of it going here. We've got the credential coming in. We've got the core commandlet to send the mail message. Now we need to set up some parameters. We're going to need the body. We're going to need the subject, and we're going to need who we're sending it to. Let's go back here again so I don't type all this in again. Okay. Now I can show you what we're doing.
So again, just saving a little bit of time.
Saving a little bit of time here. I mean, this actually doesn't take very long at all to type this in. But here we've set up the parameters. And this, again, is PowerShell. This is the way you set up parameters in a PowerShell script. Here we have, we use the param statement. And then we set up, first one is a string type, and it's the to address. And we're at the top here, we're just setting that it's a mandatory. By default, if you just didn't include this at all, by default, parameters in PowerShell are optional.
Right.
But by adding this in, you have set it to be true. That means whoever uses this runbook has to set this.
Yeah.
So we have the to address, we have the subject, and we have the body. Okay, and they're all strings.
Yep.
And so now we're all set to go. So let's go and we'll save this like this. And at this point, the runbook is being saved, but it's being saved into a session, but it's not being published yet. So it's not out there so it can be run in production. It's just been saved locally so that if you happen to go away, you know, it's 5 o'clock, your day's over, you want to close out your session, come back, you can then come back and start editing your runbook again.
So I had a quick question with regards to the authoring tool. Is it a recommendation to start from scratch or write by default in the authoring tool, or could you use your PowerShell ISE locally to write it and then just copy and paste it in? Is that a valid option?
Yeah, I mean, with textual native PowerShell runbooks like this, a lot of people write directly in their PowerShell ISE.
Right.
And in fact, we have a plugin. Our team has a plugin you can get on the internet. If you search for Azure Automation PowerShell ISE plugin, then you will be able to install that.
Yep.
And you can do your authoring right in the PowerShell ISE if you want to.
That's if you prefer.
And so it really depends. A lot of people do that, and then they'll just do touch-ups here in our our web-based
Gotcha.
tool.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So let's go into the test pane here. So this is another aspect of our tool here. We have a full test pane. And here we can put the to address. And again, this is automate. So automate everything at Outlook.com.
Is it looking for a well-formed email address? If you just put Matt in there, it wouldn't work?
We don't have where you can put rules yet on parameters.
Right.
But right now it's just it's looking for a string.
Right, okay.
And it's not even going to, if you put in an integer in there or some other, it won't catch it right now, but it will catch when you actually try to run it. That's
Right.
when you would fail.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll just call this a hello. Hello world, okay. And we'll start this. And what's happening at this point is that the runbook is being queued up. And the way that jobs are queued, even test jobs are queued to run in the runbook workers we have. When it says queued here, that means that it's been put into the database and it's waiting to be picked up by a runbook worker.
Right.
So when you run these in Azure, we have a whole pool of runbook workers. Each one of them gets used and spun up for you individually. So this is part of the tenant isolation that keeps runbooks and all of your information separate from everybody else who's using Azure Automation.
I see.
So here we've gone from queued to starting. You notice the starting was extremely quick, and now it's running. So it's running through, it's pulling in the input parameters, it's going to get the credential, and then it's going to pass that credential information to the send mail, and then at the end of this, it will, at this point, it will, when it ends, it will have sent the email.
Yeah, and I think this test capability is incredibly important. It's something similar we've got with Azure Site Recovery to test failover, for instance. Testing your runbooks is incredibly important to make sure that they function as expected and that they work effectively.
Exactly, and the typical case is that you're testing, you make some more changes, you test. In this case here, we had most of it created ahead of time, but most runbooks are more complex, and you'll test each piece as you go. So let me go quickly over here to see if that worked. It hasn't shown up yet. I guess I can refresh this. There it is. So there's our email that we just sent. I just want to show one little piece here. So if we go back to the one that was already created, notice in here I put in these right verboses. So if you want to help yourself with troubleshooting or getting more information about the Azure as the runbook is working, you can we suggest you use right verbose. Now, a lot of people will use output. Right output to just give themselves messages that come out of the pure output.
When the script is running. Or
when the script is running.
Right.
If you want to see what the progress is, we're at this command, we're at this one. We suggest that you use right verboso because we want output to be objects that are used to be passed to the next runbook. And as you think more about runbooks being used inside runbooks, then you're going to depend on the output of one runbook for another one.
Yeah.
And you want the output to be something useful, not just some descriptive message about it. So we suggest using right verbose. And what will happen here is that these messages will come out. As you run your test, you'll see those messages come out to you.
Right.
So let me now publish this. So we've tested it locally. We're going to publish it now. And I want to show you one other thing I'm going to set up on this. We send mail live. I'm going to go into the settings here.
So when you say publish, does that mean that other people can now use it? Because prior to that, it was just restricted to you because you were editing and working on it.
Exactly. So if it wasn't published, then you could only run it in the test mode.
Right.
It's only available to the person who's testing it.
Right.
And then once you put it into publish mode, then it's available to everyone else who can use that automation account.
Right.
They can either run it by itself, they can run it in another runbook, they can hook it up to a schedule, you can run it on a schedule, you can hook it up to something called a webhook, which is a URL which will start that runbook from some other system. So then it's available. Another thing that's to remember is that once you have it in a published mode here, so now it's published, if I go back into edit, and let me just scroll back here a second. Notice that now it says in edit. In edit means that there is a published version and there's the edited version.
Right.
So even as I'm editing this and making changes to it, that published version can be running. And it's running with the previous version that was published.
I see.
And then if I finish my changes here and then publish it, then it will become the official published version.
Nice.
So let's just do one more thing here. We'll go to start. So we have, since we published it, now I can go to start. This is a full normal start. Auto.
So this time we're going to run it for real. So we're not in test mode. We're in actual published mode.
So now automate everything at outlook.com. The subject is this is from a live test. And now we're going to run this. And while this is running, I just want to go here for a second and point out this logging and tracing part of the settings. One of the things that you can do in here is you can, by default, those verbose records, progress records. So when a PowerShell runbook runs, it puts out various streams. There's the output stream, but it also puts out some useful streams like the verbose stream, where you can put information that you want to send out to the records. It also logs the progress streams, which is basically an automatic logging of every single commandlet that you have here. So if you want to write these verbose records, you want these as part of your logging, you can just turn that on. This tracing down here we'll talk about when we get to graphical runbooks. If we turned on verbose tracing, and I'm going to go back and start this again, because I want verbose tracing on.
So that's something that would come through on the email itself, or is that something that you would access within the system here?
That's going to be accessed within the system.
Right.
So only the subject and body will
be in the email, essentially.
Yeah, will be in the email. But what we'll see here, so now we're into the job view. So now we've created a job. This is our job dashboard. You can see it's telling you now that the job is running. There's lots of other info you can get here. Eventually, when you can see if there's any errors that are going to happen. You can see if there's any warnings. You can go into see what the input was, and you can see what the input was to this. You can see what the output was. This job doesn't have any output, but it has verbose logs. And so you can go in here, you can see these verbose logs that came out.
Right.
So if you're in a production system and you want to be able to track what your runbooks are doing, then you can write these verbose logs out. You can come into here and you can see what's going on. Say a runbook failed for some reason. This is one good way to help you troubleshoot.
Great, good advice.
And so with that, if we go back here to you can see we've gotten all these nice mails that have been delivered to us. They could be delivering information about this automation we created and what was the status of it. And so that completes our demo.
Nice, excellent. So that brings us to the end of exploring how we, in a textual manner, create runbooks. And the nice thing about that is we took you from, Chris took you from nothing, essentially, and starting to reuse code, which is a good best practice, is to reuse from the gallery and from existing runbooks and the PowerShell modules and so on, to build your runbooks that are specific to your environment. And we took you from having nothing to a runbook that actually provides some useful functionality. So great work, thanks for that. Please stick with us in the next module, because we're going to look at a more graphical approach to building those runbooks. So make sure you join us then. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, welcome back to this Microsoft Virtual Academy, all about hybrid IT management with a specific focus on automation. Now, continuing from the previous module where Chris gave us lots of insight into how we build runbooks from a textual perspective, and we explored a number of the key components, modules, assets, credentials, and more. In this module, we're going to build on what we've learned, but now focusing on how we do this graphically with some new capabilities that have recently come into the service. So, Chris, bring us up to speed with what we need to know with graphical runbook authoring. And are we doing slides or are we doing demo?
Hi, Matt. Yeah, I'm going to do a demo here. And what I want to do, in the previous module, we talked about creating a native PowerShell runbook. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create a graphical runbook that's also based on native PowerShell. And we're going to show you the differences between the two authoring capabilities, and also show you some of the nice things that you can do with graphical authoring in this tool set that we've created.
Cool.
The runbook I'm going to create is going to be one that is going to work against Azure. When we did the native PowerShell runbook, we used it to sort of a generic runbook that would send an email using your live.com account. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create a graphical runbook that works against Azure. So if you want to manage your Azure resources in general, it's going to authenticate with Azure. It's going to get a list of all your virtual machines.
Right.
And then it's going to output the status of each one of those virtual machines. Is it running? Is it stopped? So it just gives an example of how you work against Azure, and then also a useful way of seeing information about your Azure resources.
Nice.
Yep.
So what have we got on the screen here? What are we looking at?
So on the screen here, we're into the automation account. And again, you can see that you can have access to all of the resources that you need if you're building a runbook. That includes access to the runbooks and also access to important information like in the assets here. So for this particular runbook here, we're going to be very interested in connections. But also here you can set schedules, you can set runbooks on schedules, you can see all the modules that are available to you, which we've talked about before. But today I'm going to talk about a connection. And in particular now, this is something that we just recently released, that if you create a new automation account, we will create for you a couple of connection types. One connection type is for working against the ARM Azure resources, which is the new Azure Resource Manager model. And we create a service principal, which is a way to authenticate against Azure for working with your ARM resources.
Right.
And we do this for you, and then we even create this connection type for you here too, which has all the information you're going to need to authenticate with Azure, and I'll show you how to use that. And very shortly, we're also going to have another one here called Azure Classic Run As Connection within a few months, where you can actually also connect with your Classic resources as well. And we wanted to do this because we know that authentication is a problem that folks have had when working against Azure, and we wanted to make it really easy. And so this is one of the features that we've created now that makes it quite easy for you to authenticate and work against your Azure resources.
Right.
And I'll show you how we're going to use that connection within the runbook. So let's go in here, and first I'm just going to run over here, and I'm just going to show you, this is actually the runbook we're going to create. So we're going to recreate this today. This, we're going to call it Get Azure VM Info. It's going to log into Azure. It's going to get your VMs in a certain resource group. It's going to get the status of each VM. And then it's going to write a simple output of the name of the virtual machine and the status.
Right.
In the previous module, we created a runbook that sends an email. You could very easily extend this to send yourself an email. Say every day you wanted to know what the status of your VMs were. So you're managing 1,000 VMs. You could send yourself an email saying, oh, here's all the statuses. And that's one way to build up these sort of runbooks to be useful to you.
Could be quite a big email.
Quite a big email, I know.
Really long.
So we'll go here. So we're going to create that one. So let's go ahead and add a runbook. And we're going to quick create. And we're going to call it Get Azure VM Info. And the type we're going to put in here, it's going to be a graphical. Notice we have the native PowerShell, and we have graphical that uses the native PowerShell engine.
Right.
And so we're going to create one of those.
If you chose the import option, where would you import from? Where would you be typically importing from? Would you be your on-prem ISE environment that you've built something already, or an existing runbook that somebody else has built?
Right. So when you import, this is going to import from the machine that your browser is running on.
Right. Okay.
So it's your local machine.
Okay.
So if you have a runbook store in your local machine, or you're using source control that maps the runbooks and modules and commandlets to your local machine.
Right.
This is a place you could import from.
Nice. This a bit of time. Yeah.
In this case here, I can say that I had this one that I had built somewhere else. And I'm going to talk about this later. And then I had exported it locally.
Right.
And then I had imported it into another account. So that's also another way if you have multiple accounts right now, and you want to move resources from one account to another, you can export and then import.
Right.
And do that.
Right.
So here we're going to create this, and it's going to now create this runbook. It's in the creation process, and it's going to open up to the editing pane. It says we created successfully, and then here we are in the editing pane. So I just want to take a minute here just to talk about the editing pane and the things that are available to you. One is you have a library over here that has all of the commandlets that are available in the system. These are both modules that we have on every single automation account for you, most of the Azure modules, most of the PowerShell modules, but also modules that you've imported yourself. You have access to all of the runbooks that you have in your system that you've created. You have access to the assets, which is the the variables, connections, credentials, and certificates that you have. And in particular, we're going to use a connection here a little bit later. And also we have one down here called runbook control, which are other special activities. One is a code activity, which allows you to write pure PowerShell code in a graphical runbook. So there's going to be cases where the graphical pieces aren't doing what you need, and so you can go back and you can still write some PowerShell
It becomes
here.
like a hybrid, at least from a textual and graphical perspective.
Right, and more as we build in the graphical, we do put more and more work into graphical runbooks, you're going to find that the requirement to write code is going to become less and less.
Yeah.
But it's still there as a way for you to do it if you have to.
Right.
And then another one here is called junction. And I'm not going to use a junction today, but a junction is a way for if you have parallel branches in a graphical workflow. And maybe someday we'll do a more advanced module on a little bit of an advanced runbook here.
Yep.
And we can show how to use junction, because it basically would wait for the parallel branches, and then you can proceed from that.
Nice.
But today we will use the code. And so I want to, so the first thing we need to do if you're going to work against Azure is you need to authenticate with Azure. And there's a couple of things you have to do, and I've encapsulated those two things into this runbook here. And I'm going to go back and look at this runbook a little bit in a second here and show you what it does. But this is a way to modularize your runbooks. When you're working against Azure, you're always logging in, and that really requires two commandlets. You have to first get your connection, and then you have to authenticate with Azure.
Yep.
Well, there's no reason to do those two things in every runbook, so I've put them into one single runbook here. And you notice that if I pull a runbook in, it's sort of this rounded section here. So I'm going to save this for a second, and I'm going to go back and look at Login Azure just to show you what it does real quickly. This is the one that I just created, and we'll go back in and we'll edit that and see what it does. And you can see here that it has two different activities that it uses. One is called Get Run As Connection. So what I've done here, under Assets, I went to Connections, and here's my Azure Run As connection. I say Add to Canvas, and boom, we have an activity then that's going to go get that connection, which I showed you earlier, the Azure Run As connection, and pull it into the runbook here. So that was how that one was done. And then we have a second activity called Log into Azure. And you note that the name is actually Add Azure RM Account.
Right.
And the way I found it was using search up here.
So this particular box is representative of a very specific commandlet, essentially, that
Right.
you're requiring.
Right, and you notice that I was able to do a search up here. I didn't have to browse through the library here, and then I can take this commandlet and I can add it to the as well. So then what I did is I added it in and I linked these two together. Note that there's a couple different types of links you can use. I want to talk about that in a second. There's a pipeline link and there's a sequence link. And they're very obvious. If you've worked with PowerShell, you'll understand the difference between a pipeline and you'll know what a pipeline is. A pipeline means that basically the objects that are created here are often passed one by one. So Get Run As Connection only has one object that it outputs. But it's going to, if there's one object, then a pipeline link sends that object will be sent and be available to this activity right here.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things that's nice about a pipeline link. One is that it passes the object itself. And if you had, say this, and I'll talk about this a little bit later in our when we go back to the other runbook, the difference between pipeline and sequence. So I just want that to be aware to folks that there are these two different pipeline types and are two different link types, and we'll talk about those.
Right.
Anyway, and then log into Azure. We're going to go in here to the parameters, and you'll see that we are going to, one thing I did here is I selected a parameter set. The parameter set was the service principal certificate. So that's basically how we've set up this Azure Run As connection for users, is that it uses a certificate and uses a service principal, okay? So when you're using the Add Azure RM account, you select the service principal certificate parameter set, and that shows you then all of the different parameters you need.
Right.
In this case, the data source I'm using as input is you can see all these different data sources you have available to you. So let me just step back a second here and show you what we're doing. So what we're doing is we're setting up the input parameters to this commandlet.
Yeah.
We click into parameters, We selected the parameter set, and now we see all the parameters that are on this.
Right.
And
for that particular commandlet, you might find if you've got a different commandlet, the parameter set is smaller. You might not have as many choices.
Exactly.
Right.
The number of parameters varies a lot. Some are required and some are optional. And then what we're doing is we're saying, okay, here's what the input to that parameter is going to be.
Yeah.
And what we've done is in this parameter value blade is you can pick from all of these different sources as the input to that parameter. You can pick a constant value if you want. You can pick and then you can put the runbook input. So if you've defined a runbook input parameter, you can choose that.
Right.
Activity output is extremely useful.
So that takes the output of something else and takes that as its input parameter.
Yeah, so that's taking the output of,
in this case, the previous
this activity.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we're going to use the output of that. And in this case, we don't know the exact paths for that, so we had to type it in. And it was the application ID. So I just typed that in.
Right.
And that. So then you could also use a pure PowerShell expression if you wanted. You could get a variable asset. You could get empty string. There's many different things you can use. So make it very flexible to actually set these.
So those assets come from the assets section we saw earlier on. Yep.
Right. So if you wanted to, if you needed to pull in, a variable. Let's say I don't have one in here, but if you had to pull this in as an input, you could do that if you wanted
or
to.
a credential or something like that.
Or anything like that. So it just makes it very easy to configure your activities from these various data sources that you have. But by far the most common one is to configure it from the output of a previous activity, which is what we've done here.
Right.
Okay.
Now, there would be nothing stopping you actually taking these two pieces of the runbook and actually putting them in the other runbook directly. It's just they are then restricted to that runbook.
Right.
Whereas here, they can be used in this form, this runbook that you've built, Login Azure, it can be used with lots of other runbooks.
Exactly. So when I'm working against Azure, I do the same thing in every single runbook.
Right.
And so I figured, why do I want to reconnect and reconfigure this every single time I make a runbook?
Yeah.
I'm going to do it once. Okay, and I've saved it here, and then I can use it. It's all set to go, and then I can use it in all of my other runbooks.
Right. Yeah.
So we will now, in this one that we've just created, we'll go into this, and we're going to use this. So we've got the login piece all done. I don't have to do any configuration. It's all set to go. I just pulled it in. It's all ready to go. So the next thing we need to do is we realize that in this case here, we want to get our VMs. So let's
using the search again.
So I use search again. Here's get Azure RM VM. Add that to Canvas.
And that's rectangular because it's a commandlet in this case.
And this is a commandlet, so it shows up as rectangular. So we're giving you a little bit of hints here about what is the piece that you're using.
Yep.
And we decided here, if we go back to this one here, that we decided in this case that we want to get the VMs that are in a particular resource group, because often people, the reason resource groups were set up is so you can set your resources in sort of these packages. You can say, oh, here's this particular app, here's this app, here's that.
Here's our marketing VMs, here's our database VMs, for instance.
Right. It's a great way to organize.
Yep.
And so we're going to want to set up an input parameter here, and we're going to call this input parameter resource group. Okay. It's just going to be a string. We're going to say it's required in this case. If it was optional, we'd be able to set some custom value if we wanted to.
Right.
We could put one in here.
So if somebody doesn't enter something.
Yeah, if you could put something in by default if you wanted to. But let's just call this one mandatory for now. And we'll just say OK. And so one of the things I'm going to do here too is these names are a little bit weird. So you notice that the name of the runbook and the name of the label were the same. We're going to say make it a little bit friendlier. Okay, and this is get Azure RM VM. Okay, fine. So I'm going to make it a little bit friendlier there.
Nice.
And then I'm going to go into the parameters here and get VMs. And the parameter set I'm going to choose is resource group name.
Yep.
So,
a lot smaller list this time.
And here it's telling you that it's required. Here it's telling you a little bit more info. This is a type of a string. It's required, yes. So we get some more information about this parameter. Now we can click into that. And what we're going to choose here is the runbook input, because we just created this input parameter called resource group, and that we're going to map this to the input to this now.
Right. So that will require some input from the person that's running the runbook, essentially. Is that what that's saying?
Exactly.
Right.
So
you won't get that from login to Azure, because the output of login to Azure isn't a list of resource groups, is it? So
exactly.
Right.
So now we have the ability to get the VMs. And so at this point, you're going to need to, so that's going to get the VMs. With these ARM VMs, getting actually to the status is a little bit, there's a little bit more work you have to do. So what I've done, again, is I've encapsulated this as a runbook. So we want to get the VMs and we want to get their status. Are they running or are they stopped? And I've created another little runbook here called, actually I haven't imported it yet. So this is another part of the demo. I want to show you something that's really cool. So I'm going to save this. I'll be able to come back later on and finish our work. Now I'm going to show you here about the gallery. So what we're going to do is I've created a runbook that will, it's a helper runbook. And for any virtual machine in Azure, it will get you the status of it.
Right. Like, is it running, is it stopped, that kind of information?
Exactly. So I've encapsulated that, and I actually put this up onto Script Center. And this is an example of our gallery where you can access either modules, scripts, runbooks that are in either Script Center or in PowerShell Gallery, and you'll have Beth talk about this later.
Yeah.
I'm going to focus this down just to graphical runbooks and ones that are from Microsoft. I'm going to say OK. And you note here that we have these nice icons that tell you the different types of runbooks. So like this icon here that's kind of open is a PowerShell workflow, graphical PowerShell workflow. And this is the new graphical PowerShell type.
Right.
And I uploaded this runbook called Get Status of Azure V2 VM. Okay, this runbook gets the power state status of a V2 VM. The runbook returns either running or stopped. Okay, you can run this runbook by itself or use it as part of another runbook.
Right.
So we want to use it as part of our runbook. So I'm going to click on this. It gives you a picture of it here, showing you what it does.
Nice.
And then I'm going to, so you can, see, is this really what I want? And then you can import it. Say import. You can change the name of graphical runbooks if you want. I'm going to keep the name the same. It tells you the type that's going to be imported. You could write a description if you wanted to. We'll say OK. Oh, wow, I already have it here. OK. I'm going to say 2. Say OK.
Just like that, you've got a new runbook. You didn't have to build it. Well, you did build it, obviously, originally, but if I was importing that, I didn't have to build it. I can reuse your hard work, which is always great.
Yeah, and that's really a nice part of the extensibility story, and also about the community story, is that there's a whole community of folks out there creating runbooks. You can go out and often find things already that you can just
even if it's just something small and very specific, it still can be relevant to your environment.
So here's that one I just pulled in. Notice I had pulled it in before, so it was already there. So we're actually going to use this, and we'll go back to our Get Azure VM Info. I'm going to do one other thing right now. I'm going to click into this runbook, and what I want to do is I want to look at the settings, which are already there, and I want to look at login and tracing, just to talk about some of the tracing you can do. So within a graphical runbook, there's not only can you log verbose records and progress records,
like we saw earlier,
as part of your troubleshooting.
Yep.
But you can also, we've implemented some very nice tracing.
Right.
You can have basic tracing, which for every single activity you have in your runbook, if you have basic, it'll output a string that says the start time and the end time. So you can actually see, okay, here was when this activity ran, here's this activity. So if you have any errors that are happening or exceptions, you can see exactly where it's happening in your runbook.
Right, so it might say login to Azure took 4 seconds, the get status took 15 seconds, those kind of pieces. Right,
and then if an error occurs, you know that, oh, it occurred at, this activity went fine, when this activity ran, there was a problem.
Okay, nice.
And you can do detailed, which actually then will output other info, like all of the input data to a particular activity, and also any of the output data.
Right.
So this is a very handy way to actually see what's going into an activity and what's coming out.
Lots of
very easily.
Yeah.
And when you use this, right now you need to, these are using the verbose stream, so you need to turn on verbose records as well. Someday we'll hook these both up so that they just happen automatically. But right now for graphical, if you really want tracing. Turn on both verbose and
Right.
that. So I'm going to save that. We'll use that. And then we'll go back and we'll edit. So we've logged into Azure. We've got the VMs. Now we want to use this runbook to get the status. And that was right here.
That was the original one you imported, yeah.
We could have used either one of those because they're identical copy.
Yeah.
And
Got to get that line straight.
you can make some very beautiful runbooks here if you want to. It's very cool.
Yeah, nice.
So hopping back for a second about these links linked together. Again, we have a pipeline and a sequence. If I do a sequence, you know it comes out as a straight line.
Right.
So the core difference is that when we run this get VMs here, and it's working against a resource group, it's probably going to get more than one. It's going to return like the object of multiple virtual machines. If you're using a pipeline, then those objects will be passed to this one here. Excuse me. One at a time.
Right.
So VM1 will be passed to here, and it'll do some work. VM2 will be passed to here, and this will do some work. So this will actually work one at a time on the objects that come out of get VM,
Gotcha.
and it will get the full object. If I did this, and there's reasons you might want to do this. If I did sequence, then all of the objects that come from get VM are packaged into an array.
Right.
And so then this activity here would have to act on that array of virtual machine objects and not each object itself.
You could still do it, but it's just a little bit more.
A little bit more work, and there's reasons. In general, I suggest just sticking with pipeline because that's the most obvious one. But there are cases that if you use pipeline and say this returns 0 VMs, well then the next activity would not run.
Right.
Okay, so that's the reason why if you had that case and you had to worry about it, you might want to use a sequence. If you're worried that one activity would return 0 output, and there's even some cmdlets and activities that don't have any output at all, they just do something.
Yeah.
Then your next link would want to be a sequence.
Right. Okay.
So that if you use sequence, then the next one will always run.
Right.
So it's just anyway, just stick with pipeline for starters, and everything will work great. So let's change the name of this again. We'll just make it a little bit friendlier. So that's the get VM status. And let's see what kind of input parameters it needs. Okay, we have 2 input parameters required. One's a VM name, it's a string, and the resource group name is a string. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in here. We're going to use activity output.
Yep,
we're going to get the output of get VMs. And in this case, we actually know what the output objects are, and I'm going to be able to map directly to, just by clicking now, to those objects. So boom, I got the VM name, and in this case, I could either use the runbook input, or I could use the activity output. They're both going to have the same correct resource group. And I'll just go down here and get the resource group name. And just like that, we have configured those two. For this particular runbook here, I'm going to set this to false. In that particular runbook, I have the option of running it by yourself if you want, which means you'd have to log into Azure. In this case, we've already logged into Azure, so we don't need to do it again.
So essentially, that branch that we saw earlier on when we saw the graphical representation, it kind of branched off to the left to do the login. You're essentially saying, don't bother with that.
Right.
Just go straight through.
So this login to Azure, or this one here has a couple of different. You could use it by itself if you wanted, or you could use it as a child runbook.
Right.
So they're just things to think about when you're creating. Okay. So now we're logged in. We're getting the VM. We're getting the status. Now we want to do some output. And what I'm going to do with output here is I'm going to show you how to use this code piece. Now the code activity is one that do we create special.
Yeah. There's nice little slanted edges there.
Little slanted edges. So you're being able to see a little bit of the difference of what pieces you're using. And it does help you when you're troubleshooting later on. Am I calling activity? Am I calling a runbook? In this case, we're using one. If I showed you junction here, I'll just show it for the heck of it. Junction is very different. We're not going to use a junction, but you can see it. It really shows up quite different here.
Yeah.
So in code, we're going to have the capability of writing, and I'm going to change the name from code to I'm going to output the VM name and status. And I'm going to be able to write pure PowerShell code in here. You can write anything you want. If you wanted to, you could write an entire runbook in here. I'm going to step back over here to the one we already created and just copy this in. And I'll talk about this construct here a little bit more. Okay, so what we've done here is that there are a couple of objects that you can use that are related to graphical runbooks. One is called the activity output. And so you see $ activity output. We have an array that literally has the output of every one of these activities.
Right.
So all you got to do is say activity output, then the name that you have given the activity, in this case get VMs. And I know that out of get VMs, there's a property called name.
Yep.
And then I've said plus, and I put another string here, just a colon. And then I get the activity output of get VM status.
Right, so you're just concatenating those together.
So I'm just building up a string that says that VM name and status, okay? And then we're ready.
Cool.
So we've saved that.
Almost too easy.
And then we're going to go here to the test pane. And that's the goal of this. We want to make it really easy so that you can build up runbooks very quickly from all these different blocks here.
Yep.
I need to remember what the resource group name is. Go back to my virtual machines and automation test, okay? So that's the resource group that has these virtual machines. I'm going to start it now. And like that. I'll do one, I'll say one thing. Right here it says run settings. Right now it says run on Azure.
Yep.
If I had set this account up to have a hybrid runbook worker, which means I could not only run in Azure cloud, or I could run on a machine, my local machine, then that would have shown up here. You would have the option of Azure or hybrid worker. And then you can choose. So if you want to run your tests on a local hybrid runbook worker, not in Azure, you can do that.
Right, and Ravi's going to cover that later on as well when we look at automating on-premises infrastructure.
Exactly, and that's part of our hybrid story.
Yeah.
So you can see here, one thing I want to point out is that because this is a native PowerShell graphical runbook, it starts very quickly.
Right.
For graphical runbooks that were based on Windows PowerShell workflow, especially if you had child runbooks in them, there's a compilation phase that can take a minute or more to compile. So the runbooks, even though you get the power of checkpointing, you also pay a penalty of how long it takes to start the runbook.
Right.
You notice that these start extremely quickly. Here you're starting to see some of the tracing that's coming out of this. And what you're able to, so that was the area we could all cut. So what you're seeing here then is the tracing that's coming out, and you're seeing all the information that we've set up in the tracing. Not only does it show the start of every activity and the end of every activity, but it's also showing the input and output data. So in this case, this is the output of the get VM activity there, showing you what a VM object is coming out.
Right.
And if you needed to, you could drill through that and see what is the output of that particular one, and you could understand maybe why your runbook is failing or not.
Do some deeper analysis on it and stuff.
Exactly. So this is showing you how you can use that tracing within your testing. And then here in a different font, you can see here's the actual output.
Right.
So we have this VM Ubuntu 16.04. It's been stopped, and the Win212 R2DC is running.
Nice.
So in this case, we've shown that how you can create a graphical runbook and that authenticates against Azure and does a particular useful job for you.
Nice.
With your Azure resources.
And you can use some of those resources that you've uploaded to the gallery.
We've showed you how to do modularization, use stuff from the gallery, build your own little sub-runbooks, and use them within other runbooks.
Awesome. So that brings us to the end of the demo. Nice work again. So hopefully you've followed along both in the previous module and this one, and now have much more of an appreciation for how you build both textual and graphical runbooks, and both have significant advantages. I'm more of a graphical guy, but I think you still need to have an appreciation of PowerShell. You can't just start dragging things on and just hope it's going to work. You still need to just have an appreciation, understand how PowerShell works and the constructs and the modules and the assets and the credentials. And there are best practices, I think, that would be shared across both graphical and textual, the use of credentials and assets and those kind of things as well. So yeah, very insightful. And stick with us for the rest of the course as we continue our look at the key capabilities and technologies powering Azure automation, OMS automation. So stick with us, and thanks again to Chris.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Hello, welcome back to this Microsoft Virtual Academy, all about hybrid IT management, specifically focusing in on automation. I'm still Matt McSpirit, Technical Evangelist, and in this module, we're following on from previous modules where we've looked at how you get started with automation, and then how you build some runbooks using PowerShell, PowerShell Workflow, and the Visual Designer. And now we're going to be focusing in on how you can actually reuse other people's work through the gallery. So Beth, thanks for joining me. Before we learn about the gallery, what do you do at Microsoft? Bring us up to speed.
I've been at Microsoft for about 3 years now.
Nice.
Some of the other products that our team releases are Service Management Automation and Orchestrator. So I was going to say SMA because I'm used to saying SMA.
All that acronyms. Just, SMA or SMA.
Yeah,
whatever
SMA,
works.
SMA, yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah.
And you've been at Microsoft so since 2013. You've done events as well, like Ignite.
Yeah, so I've done some events. I've included a link of some of the sessions that we've done at Ignite.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. So, what is this automation gallery about? I mean, it seems to me as a great way of being able to reuse other people's work, which I love because speeds things up for me. Is that generally what it's all about?
Yeah, that's definitely what it's about. So it's a gallery of community content. So it has both Microsoft and members of the community can publish content there, and they can publish scripts or PowerShell modules. And what that allows us to do is to go in, so you don't have to start from scratch. So you can go in and look at the gallery to find some sort of task that you might want to do, so to help get you started.
Right, so it could be something simple like deploy a VM, or it could be something much more complex.
Exactly,
right.
And we have tons of content in both of the galleries. So the two sources for the gallery, so you can find it from within Azure Automation, or you can go outside to either PowerShellGallery.com or TechNet Script Center.
Yeah, the PowerShellGallery.com seems quite a catchy link, I think.
Yeah, it's
easy to remember, memorable. Yeah, what do you need? A gallery for PowerShell? PowerShellGallery.com.
Yep, that's it. Yeah.
That's it. We need a TV ad for that. Yep. So what kind of modules can we find in there? Give us some examples.
Yeah, so I'll actually walk you through and show you some examples later on, but there's tons of modules. There's the AWS, all of the Azure modules are there, and I think there's over 600 right now, so there's just a ton of content out there if you need to, for your building blocks to get started.
Okay, and so once you get on the module gallery, how do you navigate? Is it easy to click around, or is there search terms and stuff?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different search terms that you can go by. So when you enter the module gallery from your automation account, you can browse by a number of different pieces of metadata. So you can search for the name, you can search for content, you can search for tags, the author. The other cool thing that I really like is you can search by the commandlet. So if you have a commandlet in your script and you don't know what module it came from, you can search from that as well.
So you're really getting down in the weeds there. I know the commandlet, so I'm going to search for that, and it gives you all of the modules that use or contain that commandlet?
Exactly, yeah.
Right. Okay, cool, nice. So that's the module gallery.
Yep.
What's the other gallery?
Yeah, so the Runbook gallery, and that's powered by Script Center, allows you to search for runbooks. So we have 3 different types of runbooks in Azure Automation. You have PowerShell runbooks, PowerShell Workflow runbooks, and then you also have graphical runbooks. And you can find all of these through this gallery here.
And they're the 3 that we learned about in the previous couple of modules.
Yep.
Right, okay. So there's modules that we can search for. There's the runbooks that we can search for. Would you need both? I mean, would you download some modules and some runbooks and combine them together to make it all work, or would one bring in the necessary dependencies?
Yeah, so it really depends what you're looking to do. So it's possible. Azure Automation actually ships a number of modules out of the box.
Right.
So we ship a number of the Azure RM or ARM modules, and then the Azure Service Manager, that module. So you can use those right out of the box, but if you're missing a module, you can import it in from the gallery and then use it in your own runbook, so you can use it as a building block to build your own script. Or you can actually import a module and then import a script that uses that module.
Gotcha. So there's some linkage there between the two.
Yep.
Cool. So you wanted to show us how this all works, how people get started with the gallery?
So I'm just going to hop into my automation account right now. And there's 2 different entry points today for the gallery. So you can go into Assets and go to Modules. And you can see I have a bunch of different modules in my account already. So some of these modules, like this OMS Alert Helper, are not a global module, so that means that it's not provided by Microsoft, and I've imported it myself.
It's not in the box, essentially, when you
Yeah,
create it.
exactly.
Okay.
Or if I go to my Azure module over here, this should be one that should be provided from, so you can see, yes, it's a global module, which means that Microsoft, so the automation team, is actually shipping it for you, and you can use those modules in your runbooks right away.
So just so I understand then, so something that ships by default in the box when you sign up and you register your account and stuff, that's a global module because it's built by Microsoft and it's included in the box. If you found a module in the gallery that was provided by Microsoft, would that be a global module as well?
No, we wouldn't consider it a global module because the global modules will actually update for you. Right. So you can see I'm on version 1.03 right now.
Right.
When there's newer versions, we actually will roll out those newer versions. When you import a module in yourself, so if you deploy it from the gallery, you're then responsible for updating that module, and it gives you a little bit more control. So you might want to update the module and then make sure all your scripts that are using that module are updated.
Okay. That makes sense. Good to know.
Yep.
Okay.
Cool. So you can see there's two different ways you can add modules here. So one, if I click Add a Module, I can actually import local modules from a local file. I can also browse the gallery here. So as I mentioned before, I can do things like search for a commandlet. So if I search for Start Azure RM Automation.
You just know that one off the top of your head.
Yeah, I know a lot of those commands. Yeah.
You should be proud of that.
So I can see when I click into this, I can see a description of the module, who it was created, any tags, and if there are dependencies. I can also click over to the source project and view it in the PowerShell gallery. So for example, if I click into the PowerShell gallery, I actually get over here, and I can view more information about the module itself.
Nice. Useful stuff. And there's quite a bit of information actually on here, like how many downloads, the version, when it was last updated. It's all useful stuff.
Yep, yeah. So when I click import, so what automation actually does is it checks to make sure that the dependencies are present in your automation account.
Right.
So you can see here, we don't have quite the last profile module, and since all of the ARM modules have dependencies on the profile module, those all need to have certain versions specified. Okay. So we give you a little bit of a helper, so you can say, okay, great, I need to actually import this one before I import the Azure Automation module.
So it doesn't do it for you at this stage, it just tells you?
Doesn't do it for you at this stage, although that is a feature that we're looking at adding in the future.
Right now.
You should go to user voice and request it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll do that later today.
Okay. So if I click on this and then I go to import, so this is going to be the module that I need, so the Azure RM profile module.
Yep.
And I click on OK right here. I'm clicking on that.
There we go.
So what that's going to do is it's going to take that module from the PowerShell gallery and actually load it into your automation account.
Right.
So that process is a few different steps. So you can see that first it imports, so it's now in my account, but then all of the different activities that are contained in that module need to be extracted so you can use it in your runbooks.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so it will show up.
This process is going through.
Exactly. So that's what that process is going through right now. So when the activities are finished extracting, this will go away, and you'll actually be able to use this module.
Nice. And looking at the size there, it's only quite small, so 1.3, well, just over a meg. Do they vary massively? Are some modules huge compared to this one?
Yeah, I would say the Azure module is quite large right now. So yeah, but most of them are not as large as the Azure module. So this is probably about average, yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. So as I'm importing that, I'm just going to let that go. I actually wanted to walk through a scenario today and talk about using a Linux module.
Great. Go brave.
Yeah.
Microsoft loves Linux.
Yeah. So if I click on here, I can see that there's actually a number of modules that are related to Linux in the PowerShell gallery.
Nice.
So the one that I'm going to use is from one of my teammates, Joe Levy.
Yeah, who we'll be hearing from later in the course.
Yep. So
busy building modules.
Yep. So this module, you can see it has one function which invokes an SSH command, and you can view more information on it. And so I actually already have this imported into my automation account, so I'm not going to re-import it.
And you're not going to skew his download numbers as well by re-importing?
By re-importing it, yeah, exactly. So what's going to happen then, so I'm just going to browse back to my module list just to show you guys that it's there. So I can see that I have the module in my account. It's available and ready for use right now. So if I go back to my runbooks list, so now I'm going to hop into the runbook gallery. So you can see I can add a runbook. So I think Chris may have covered this, but you can create a new runbook or import one from your local file system.
Yeah.
But if you don't want to start from scratch, if you want to look at somebody else's script to see if somebody else out there has done the task that you want to do.
Yeah. We don't call that cheating. It's not plagiarism. It's reuse.
It's
and, why
reuse.
reinvent the wheel? Yeah,
exactly.
I'm all for that. Absolutely.
Yeah, so in the runbook gallery, you can see you can also search. So you can search for the name, different authors. So I could search, for example, for myself, which I'll show. I have a few different runbooks in there.
Is that a common gallery search, your name? Or?
I don't think so. So I could search for myself there. I can also use these filters on the right-hand side. So for example, if I knew that I only wanted Microsoft official content,
right.
And maybe I only want to see graphical runbooks here, I could actually click OK. And then this is going to filter down so I only have graphical runbooks, and you can see that these are all official Microsoft scripts.
Yeah.
So that's actually not what I'm looking for now, but I'm just going to go back.
We've tried to make it difficult for you by only giving you a fifth of the button size to click on.
Yeah, it's very difficult to get that one right there.
In the taskbar.
Okay, great. So I'm actually going to import this script that I published to the gallery. So it's a pretty simple one. It's just going to use that invoke SSH command. So when I click into this, there are actually a few different things to show here. So one, I can see that this is a PowerShell runbook. We have the icon. I can see what tags are on it. I can see how many downloads. Nobody's giving me a rating yet.
Hint, hint.
And
we need to publicize the runbook more.
Yeah. And you can click on that, and then you get additional information. So you can see you get a description. I can actually link over. So if I click on this link, this is going to take me over to the source project in TechNet Script Center.
Right.
And then you also get, which I think is the most important part, you get a preview of what this script is going to do. Now this one's pretty short, but you would see this. If it's a textual runbook, you get to see the text in the runbook. If it's a graphical runbook, you'll see the visual representation of what that is.
Nice.
So now that I've decided that this is the runbook that I want to import, I'm actually just going to click import right here, and let's see. It allows you to change the name. So if I wanted to call this like Beth, for example, it would allow me to do that. You can add in your description, and then you just get a preview of what type you're importing in.
So by importing using this method, is that essentially the same as, or is if I went to the TechNet Center that you opened before and downloaded manually that way? Can I reach the same goal by both methods essentially?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just a bit easier.
Yeah, so we're just trying to make it so you don't need to leave your account and save you some steps, because otherwise you're downloading it and then you're uploading it, and but either way works. It's definitely the same thing.
Right.
So once I import that runbook becomes mine. It's in my automation account, and I can do whatever I want with it.
Right.
So, for example, if I wanted to come in, I can click on the Edit button, and I can decide to modify things. So, for example, in this case, I might not want to actually install the updates, so I might change that parameter. Just going to save that there. And you can see just in this runbook, this is doing a few different things. So it's getting a connection. So this is going to be a required configuration step. I've already done it in my account.
Okay.
And then it just invokes the command that's being passed in from here. So if I go to my test pane over here, I can see that I have a mandatory connection name. Oops. Let me just copy this. So I have a connection name, and it's going to run this default command over here. So while this is running, so this is actually going to remote into my Ubuntu machine over here and run this command to list all the updates. There's one additional required step here. So if I hop back into, I'm just going to close out of this and go back to my account over here. And if I go under assets, so when I imported that SSH module, modules in automation can have one additional file, which is actually a connection file. So it's just a JSON file that helps users in their runbooks not have to specify all sorts of parameters. So it'll collect things together in an object. So when I imported that SSH module, it also created a connection for me. So when I click under connections and I go to add a connection, so I can just say test right here and click on type, I see that a number of the modules that I have actually have connections in here. And then when I click on SSH, you can see there are a number of different properties that I fill out. So that's all specified in the module file that was published to the PowerShell gallery.
Okay.
And then in your runbook, usually there'll be two different parameter sets. One will allow you to use a connection to help simplify your workflow, and one will just take all of these parameters in.
Right.
So I can see here if I specify my computer name, port, username, and password. So I would be able to set all of those properties, and that's actually what I'm using in my runbook. So I can see in here I already have a few different connections that are set up already.
Okay, nice. But that's specific to that particular machine. What if you had a lot of machines?
Yeah, so that's it's specific to that particular machine. If you had a lot of different machines, you could either have a lot of different connections and just set the different parameter in your runbook. So whenever you scheduled it, you might want to do that. Right. You would also be able to, if you wanted, you could put it in a file and specify it in a like JSON file or something. Right. So there are definitely other workarounds that you could do if you
can use versus hard coding.
Yep.
Machine 1, machine 2, machine 3, machine 4. Right. Okay,
great. So I'm just going to pop back over to my runbook over here. So this looks like the one that I just created. And if I pop back over to my edit and then hop open to the test pane over here, we should see that this has completed successfully. And then I can see all of the different updates that were run. So you can see sort of from the end to end how much more simple it was. I didn't have to think about authoring the module. I just got those building blocks right away. Yeah. And then going from the gallery, I was able to start off with a script. And I really didn't have to do any authoring in here. But if I wanted to do authoring and customizing, I could do it.
Right, nice. So, and yeah, you could take somebody else's resources, somebody else's module, somebody else's runbook, and just tweak it how you see fit. Yeah. I guess you could then re-upload to the community.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. With a different name, with a different runbook, and whatever else. So, cool. So is there anything else that people need to know about the gallery? And obviously we've covered downloading modules, integrating the modules into your existing environment. You've got loads of stuff around using runbooks, and you've shown a demo of an example that it's not just about Microsoft, it's heterogeneous as well. What if I start to, dust off the old coding fingers and start creating something? What can I do? How can I help?
Yeah, so we really like to have the community contribute to the gallery, and that's really how we have so much content on that, where we have active community members. So there are two different places that you can go to contribute. So again, you can go to Script Center. So I have a URL here that provides some instructions for best practices for uploading scripts that will run in Azure Automation.
So things like tagging is important.
Yes, exactly. So these are, I'm showing here the three most important ones. One, we only pull content that shows up in the Windows Azure category. Note, though, that if you're in Azure Automation, we support hybrid scenarios with Hybrid Runbook Worker. So you don't necessarily need to have your samples be cloud focused.
Right, yep, good point. And we'll be covering hybrid and on-prem automation later on.
Yep, but then some of the other requirements are that you actually have to upload the file that you want people to use. So it has to have either the graphical runbook or the PowerShell script attached to it. And then you also have to include a code snippet in the upload as well.
Right, and the code snippet is... Explain to us what that means.
Oh, yeah. So when you're actually uploading to Script Center, there's a little place where you can click to add code snippet. And typically what you want people to do is to know what's in your runbook without having to download.
It's almost like that that green commented section at the top of your runbook.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can put you can put in some comments. You could put in the entire script.
Right.
So just to let people know what they're about to download before they download it.
Nice.
And of course, as you mentioned before, we want people to tag and write good descriptions so our users know what they're getting before they import.
More downloads as well, and ratings as well, which is important. So that's the Script Center. What about the PowerShell Gallery? Do I need to register for that? Can I just log in as anybody?
Yeah, so you need to do a one-time registration where you'll create an account and you'll get an API key with that you can use to publish your content there. And you can actually publish right now modules or scripts to the PowerShell Gallery, so we encourage you to publish both there. There's a ton of content there too. So
cool. Nice. So hopefully you found that useful. There's loads of cool stuff about using the gallery. I'm all for using other people's work. It really accelerates how quickly you can start to deploy automation within your environment and benefit and search through. Make sure you use the resources that Beth has provided, because it gives you a chance to actually accelerate how quickly you can start to use automation in your environment, tweaking what's there, adding to what you've already built yourself as well. So loads of cool stuff there. So thanks, Beth, for helping us understand how we can use the gallery. And in the next module, we're going to be focusing more on how you start to use existing investments in System Center and bring those forward in to automation, Azure Automation, OMS Automation, and so on. So thanks, and join us then. Hello, and welcome back to this Microsoft Virtual Academy on Hybrid IT Management, where we're focusing in on automation. Now, we've covered loads of stuff so far, such as how you get started with OMS Automation, and also how you start to build runbooks using PowerShell, PowerShell Workflow, and also the Visual Designer. But what we want to do now in this module is start to look at how we start to trigger some of these runbooks through a variety of different means. And to help us do that, we've got Jamie from the OMS Automation team to help us. So welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us what you do at Microsoft.
All right. So I'm a program manager intern here. I started just last year, end of August. And pretty much I've been working on designing some features that are still to come out.
Cool. So secret sauce.
Yeah, secret stuff. But we're right now we're going to go over, invoking runbooks, how to kick them off. There's a lot of different ways that we use, and then we'll go over 2 demos of the simplest ways of how to do them, the most common, I think.
Okay, so bring us up to speed with the different ways that you can use the solution to kick off runbooks. Now that we know how to build them, and now we know generally what they are as well for people. So how can we kick them off?
So the number one way to, as we can see here in the chart, the sort of goes from simplest to most difficult, or most complicated, or involved in actually starting them off. So first way you can see is the portal UX. So it's actually going in and just clicking start runbook. A simple way. The next way, which is probably the most common, is scheduling them, and it's you set up a schedule of sorts. Say I want this to run hourly, I want this to run daily. And then it kicks it off that way.
But that's something you have to set up specifically.
Yes. Right. So you go in, you set up a schedule, and you can link the schedule to your runbook. And we'll go over a demo of how to do that.
Okay.
The next way is webhooks. So you have a remote service or something, and it can you can throw in your parameters that you have made in your runbook. You can throw those through the webhook and use that to kick it off remotely using sort of an HTTP post.
So for somebody who's perhaps not as familiar, a webhook would be something where perhaps there's another service or site running elsewhere, and it just says, at this stage in my processing, I need to trigger off this runbook to execute.
Exactly. That's what it's for.
Okay.
Yeah. And the next thing is monitor. It's also sort of alerts. So in Azure, on your VMs, you can go to alerts and remediation under monitoring. And you can set up an alert to kick off a runbook.
Right.
So you say too many CPU reads in a certain amount of time. I want to restart this.
Right.
Something like that. And it's a great way to sort of run a runbook that you've made instead of having to, once you see the monitor alert, once you see it, then having to go manually do it. It automatically does it.
Right.
So it's a very good automated way. Automation.
It's all about automation. Exactly. Cool.
And then the last way sort of is sort of through PowerShell. So you can just run PowerShell to actually kick off your runbook. You can call it through the Azure module, and you can also using PowerShell kick off a runbook from a runbook.
Right.
So say you have a bunch of runbooks that do smaller tasks. That's the way you've written them. You can have a sort of master runbook that kicks off these smaller runbooks.
Okay, so that cascades down.
Yeah, exactly.
And triggers runbooks that might trigger other runbooks. Yes, you could have a lot of nested runbooks.
You could go for infinity.
Nice. Okay, cool. And then the final one is APIs.
Yeah. So the API, it's custom code. Whatever you're doing, you can use authentication. You can use the service principal, which has been talked about in earlier ones. Yep. And it's more complex, it's more involved, and it's very custom stuff and low level.
So some of these, there's a lot of advantages to some of these. So
Yep.
going from simple to complex, as you
Yep.
said. But what about some of these disadvantages on this table as well? What are some of those you'd perhaps focus on? Like the scheduler one seems like it's actually really handy, really useful, but the disadvantage there is, what's the parameter value modification? What's that all about?
So parameter value modification pretty much is you have to, so when you pass parameters in, you can have different ones, right?
Right.
And so with a schedule is each schedule has its own set of parameters.
Right.
So if you wanted to, run this runbook 5 times with different parameters, you would have to create 5 different schedules.
Right. So there is so there's not a global Uber schedule that can just handle everything.
Yeah.
You've got to create lots of little ones.
Just so every time you're passing in new parameters, you're creating a new schedule for that.
Right. And from a webhub's perspective as well, I've noticed there seems to be quite a few disadvantages there that obviously it's quite simple to implement, but so talk us through some of those. What do they mean?
Yeah. So one of the things is, you have to have the HTTP post.
Right.
And so you have to have that. It's quite simple that way. But it's sort of a letdown is if you don't have those, then you have to create it, set it up.
Right.
The webhook has to be secured like a password. It's sort of, once you create it, you get this link, and that's that.
Right.
If you lose it, you lose it.
Right.
If someone else gets it, you can turn off the webhook. You can disadvantage, but you can't sort of.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. You lose it. Kind of thing. So then you just have to create a new one, right? The other thing is there's sort of no job tracking in the remote service.
Right.
There's no parameter, sort of like the schedule. There's no parameter modification. So once you create a webhook, it's got a set parameters that you'll then go through.
Okay. So we've heard a little bit about the different ways to kick these off. So what are the ways that you want to show us to help illustrate some more of this in a bit more depth?
So we'll go through the portal first, and we're going to kick off a VM.
Right.
And then we're going to shut it down with a schedule.
Okay.
Or we're going to port a schedule.
Cool. Let's take a look.
So let's just go to here. Sort of see my account here. So we're going to go to Runbooks. And so we're going to go start Azure VM. And this is just how you simply start it off.
Right.
So you've imported it. This is what you see. I imported this one, from my own. I wrote it and imported it. So to kick it off, we're just going to run start.
Can we take a look at that runbook as well?
Yeah. So we can view it. So this is something I wrote myself.
Yeah.
Pretty much, it uses the service principal to log in, which is all this text right here is from the tutorial account.
Yeah.
And below here, pretty much all it does is you input a resource group that you want to look into, and then each VM in it, it's going to check what's it currently doing. Is it start, stop, deallocated, whatever. It's going to then try to start it if it isn't. And if it is, it's just going to skip and say, hey, it's already started. You don't need to do this.
Nice.
So let's go back here and start it off. And then Bruce use the demo I have here, which is the resource group. Set OK. And it's running. So, runbook submitted. And it's going to open up your job here.
Right.
And you can see here it's running. So the next thing we're going to do is go back here. And we're going to set up the stop Azure VM here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go schedule. And you can see here, so you can link a schedule to your runbook.
Right.
I have one. It's morning start.
Okay.
We don't want to do that. You don't want to stop them in the morning. So we're going to just create a new one. And to create a new one, you go here, and we're going to evening. Whoops. If I can type. Evening stop. And we're going to set this up for today.
Okay, great.
When are we going to get out of here? Say
10 p.m.
Yeah, 10 p.m.
10 p.m. on a Friday night. That's what we want.
Working really late, working on those VMs. You got to make sure they're turned on.
Yeah.
And so right now, you can set this as a one-time occurrence. You can set it as a daily or hourly.
Right.
We're going to go daily.
Okay.
And so sort of coming up with schedule is there's going to be a lot more things where you can set, like, I want Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, right now it's just this though.
Okay.
So, it runs every one day. That's exactly what I need. And we're going to create that. And then, so, new schedule is created. Parameters here. And this is sort of where we're talking about you link one set of parameters, inputs, to a schedule.
Right. So the one we just created, for instance.
So this will shut down, my Jaffe demo runbooks. And you go there and OK. And so now when we, runbooks linked, so when we go to schedules here, we should see that, it's connected to evening stop.
Mm-hmm.
It's turned on.
Cool.
And so, yeah, we'll
so all the schedules. So the schedule's done. The runbook that we triggered before is run. So that's manual and that's schedule.
So that's manual, that's schedules.
Great.
And yeah, you can also do webhooks. So to do a webhook, you go here, create a webhook. And then what we're going to do is you're going to name the webhook. So we're going to name it Jaffe demo shutdown. And then you set an expiration date for it.
Right.
And then you get the ULR.
So that's the thing you said.
So this is the
secured
password.
like the password. Yeah. So that if you lose that, you're in trouble.
Yeah. So you copy it. It's to my clipboard now, so I can do whatever I want with it.
But could you always come back into the portal and retrieve it from here?
You cannot.
All right. Okay. So I couldn't click on webhook up there where you've got the shutdown and it wouldn't display that link. Wow. Okay.
So we'll come here and double check. Yeah. So this is always, adding a new webhook.
Oh, right. Okay.
So once you get that one chance, so it says in that here, for security, after creating, it can't be previewed or anything, it can't be copied. So you get that one chance to see it, and after that,
it does give you a bright orange warning triangle. So if that's not enough to convince you to copy that and save it somewhere, then who knows? It's so quick to create one, though.
Yep.
It doesn't take long to recreate, but yeah, it's important. And then, like you said earlier, when we were looking at the table, you would take that, pass it to your application or whatever you wanted to trigger this runbook, and it would hit it from here.
And so I can see here what it does. I can see the webhook. I come down here, Jaffe shutdown, and I can see the parameters, and I can turn it on and off.
Right.
I just can't get that ULR again.
Right. So that's handy. So if you did lose it and you think, I don't want anybody triggering this, I can disable it in that way at least, or delete it, I suppose.
Yeah, you can delete. You can delete it, enable it, disable it. Maybe if you're like, I don't want to have this running for a while.
Yeah.
And you turn it off for a little bit, you can come back and turn it back on.
Right.
So you don't potentially lose it.
Nice.
Maybe you wrote it down somewhere what it was.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe on the off chance, seeing as we only remind you to write it down once or twice. So. Great. Okay. Yeah. So we looked at the portal, triggering a simple runbook. We scheduled one. We looked at webhooks. Then that gives people a pretty good idea of what's going on with how you trigger runbooks. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you found that useful. We've still got lots more to cover, including loads of modules on DSC and integrating with System Center and much more. So make sure you stick with us through the rest of the course on hybrid IT management, focusing on automation. So thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.
And keep on watching. Thank you. Hello, welcome back to this Microsoft Virtual Academy, all about hybrid IT management, specifically focusing in on automation. I'm still Matt McSpirit, and as part of the course, we've covered a huge amount of things already, from building workflows, PowerShell workflows, PowerShell authoring in the gallery, visually as well. We've looked at how you get started, how you use the gallery to import modules and runbooks and so on, a whole host of stuff. And if you haven't watched any of those modules already, what are you doing? You need to go back and watch those because they're incredibly important. But now we're going to change direction slightly and introduce a topic that should be incredibly important to you as you embark on your automation journey. And that's around desired state configuration. So I've brought along Joe to help us understand just what we need to know for DSC. Joe, tell us what you do at Microsoft.
Sure. So my name is Joe Levy. I'm a program manager on the Operations Management Suite. I've been at Microsoft for about 4 years now. I started by working on System Center Orchestrator, which is process automation for your data center and your IT within the firewall. Then worked on Azure Automation, which is process automation for your Azure resources. And now I work on automation in the Operations Management Suite, which is process and desired state configuration automation for all of your resources in the cloud, on-premise, Windows and Linux, wherever they may be, managing them at scale easily with automation.
Nice, and people can get in touch with you on Twitter. You've got your Twitter handle there, and also you've done the circuit around the various speaking events, the Tech Ed Ignite. So I guess a lot of your sessions will be recorded on Channel 9 as well.
All around. Yeah.
Nice, very cool. So help us understand what we're trying to solve for with desired state configuration. Why is it so important?
Sure. So essentially the problem we're trying to solve here is keeping the thousands of servers running my services configured correctly is incredibly complicated and error prone, right? If you have a giant infrastructure deployment of systems on-premise and different clouds, thousands of machines at scale, doing configuration management across all of them can be really hard. And the reason for that is because in addition to the fact that there's many servers and they have some state some configuration you want to keep them in, that's different in different roles. So you might have web servers, you might have database tiers, worker tiers. So there's configuration specific to certain roles where every machine in the role should have the same configuration. There's configuration that all of your machines should have in addition to that specific role configuration. And sometimes there's server specific configuration as well. So managing all the different configurations for all the different machines, especially when you're talking about a live company where there's lots of people and processes that have access to these machines and may accidentally, or because they think they're doing the right thing, go and make changes and take the service out of the desired state in terms of a state where it is able to best run the services those machines are set up for, or in a way where you're kind of following the compliance requirements of your country or your organization. Yeah,
so you have an optimal configuration that you're looking for, and occasionally things can drift, maybe like you say, human intervention or I guess otherwise, but you want to keep it in that optimal state as much as you can.
Exactly, exactly. And different people are responsible for different parts of the configuration. Configuration needs change over time. Machines, you're usually kind of scaling up over time, so there's more and more machines to manage, and how do you make sure those machines match the earlier configuration you've set up on other machines? So it's a big problem when you're talking about huge scale of machines.
Yeah, and not achievable if you're just using essentially GUI tools.
Right,
It makes it a lot more difficult.
Take you way too long. If you want to sleep every night, I wouldn't recommend using GUI tools when you have thousands of machines to manage.
There you go. You heard it here first. You sound very much like Mr. Snover. He's very into that. So I guess, do you want to, we've talked through the problem and help you understand just exactly what challenges, and I'm sure it's something that you guys are facing at home as well, and not specifically at home, at work perhaps more so. How can we start to solve it?
Sure. So the first thing I want to dive into is kind of, you've seen the automation service and a lot of process automation today on how you can run scripts in our service. But what I'd like to do is show how you do configuration management using those scripts. And it does work, it is great, it's a lot better than manual. But later we'll talk about the even better way to do it with these desired state configuration type tools.
Cool.
So I'd like to dive right into that demo.
Go for it, yeah.
All right. So I've got here my Azure, my OMS automation account. By the way, this automation service is part of the Operations Management Suite, and it's also a standalone service you can use as Azure as well. So that's why you'll hear automation in both ways. It's the same product. It's just kind of, you can use it as part of the management suite or as a standalone service, depending on your needs.
Cool.
So I have my automation account here, and I've written this script right here called Set Windows IT Rules. And what it does is it takes in a VM connection string and a VM credential asset name, which it grabs from our automation asset store, which I'm sure earlier sessions covered.
Yep.
And then what it's going to do is let me actually kick this off, and then we'll talk about it while it's running. So I've imported this script, because we can run scripts in automation, as a runbook into here. And I'm actually just going to kick this off. So I'll hit start, and then I will provide the parameters for a specific machine I've set up that is not following the configuration that I've said it needs to follow. And we'll talk about what that is in a second.
So this one's perhaps drifted out of optimal configuration, or somebody's tweaked it.
Right. Okay. So if I go back to the script that I've written, you can see I have a script in here. It's about 55 lines. And what it's doing is it's taking in a VM to connect to. It's WinRM remoting into that VM, and in this case, the desired state I'm trying to make sure is there is that the Operations Management Suite agent is there. And that's really important, because the Operations Management Suite lets you do all kind of management and gain all kinds of insights into your machines, regardless of where they're running, in the cloud, on-prem, Windows, Linux, etc. So having that MMA agent there and running is very important. So it checks for that. This machine actually doesn't have the MMA agent installed, so was configured or will return false. And then you'll see down here, if it sees that it's not configured, the next thing it does is actually go and auto-correct that behavior, right? Because we want to put it back into the desired state, the correct state for this machine to be in, having the MMA agent installed and running.
Nice.
I've actually just commented out the install step for that, so I can rerun this demo, but this would be the line to do it for the MMA agent.
Right, so it would actually go ahead and install the agent using essentially a silent install. Right, nice.
And then the next thing it does is I want some reporting on the fact that my machine is not matching the desired state. So it's going to actually send an email and it's going to invoke in line another runbook to actually send that email.
Right.
So one runbook calling another, the email logic in here, all the configuration logic in this top level set Windows IT rules runbook.
Right, nice.
So if I actually go and check on this runbook, you can see it's completed. If I go to output, I can see it was not following the IT rules. Autocorrect succeeded, which it would have if I did the install. And then it sent an email to me to say, hey, something was not following the right state. You know, you probably want to be notified that things weren't in compliance with your desired state.
Right.
So here's an example of just the email I got earlier when I sent this. It's just telling me, hey, your machine's not following the rules. So that way I could talk to people responsible for the machine, go and figure out what happened maybe if I want to, or at least just know, hey, some auto-correction took place.
Right. And we learned in earlier modules that you can do things like scheduling. So I could have this run on a daily basis, or...
That was exactly the next thing I was going to show. You wouldn't want to run this once, and you don't want to have to put in the parameters like I did from a file every time you run it.
Right.
So you'd go to schedule, and then you'd actually hook it up to a new or existing schedule. So if I wanted to run it daily, I could create a new schedule or select this existing one. And then I have this runbook running every day with my parameters already defined on what machines it should check to make sure that the machines are matching the desired state using this imperative kind of, here's the first step, here's the second step, here's the third step process runbook to do all the checking of if it's in the desired state, reporting to me if it's not, and auto-correction.
So you only get the report in this case if it's not. If everything is fine, if it's got the agent already, you wouldn't receive anything.
Yeah, but I mean, it's all up to what you implement in the runbook. You could have it send a different email to say, hey, everything's all good.
Yeah, you're amazing.
You just may end up getting, hopefully, a lot of emails saying, hey, everything's all good, right?
Nice.
So that's how it would work with runbooks today.
Right.
But there's some problems with that I'd kind of like to talk through. It's a lot better than manual, right?
Absolutely.
Because if thousands of machines, I'm not going to manually go and check every day to make sure in the desired state, it just won't scale. And I want to do that because I want to prevent the problems from happening. I don't want to only react to issues once they've happened, because that can affect my uptime, can affect if auditors come around and I'm not showing 100% compliance all the time, it can look bad. So some of the downsides, it's great to do this with a runbook over manual, but some of the downsides of that are that I actually had to write a whole process, step 1 through 10, to just say, here's my desired state. I want to make sure this desired state is enforced, right? Essentially, I should just be able to declare, hey, here's what I want, and let the underlying system take care of making it so, and reporting to me through some standard interface on whether it is or isn't matching that state. I had to write the test, the set, and the report logic, instead of just writing this is what I want, and the testing of that, the setting of that, and the reporting of that to being taken care of by kind of the underlying management system.
Right.
Not to mention this was all over WinRM, so it meant I had to actually open a port into my machine, give automation a credential to access my machine, which I'd rather not have to do, right? Because you want to, if you don't have to open ports or open firewall rules, you don't want to have to do that. The thing I wrote, that script I showed you, the 55-line script, you can't immediately tell what it's doing just by looking at it, right? You have to basically understand PowerShell, understand the process and each step of the process to really know what it's doing.
Yeah.
So all these things, and the fact that I had to schedule it, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just I have the script and it just works. I have to put that on a schedule so that it executes every day, rather than just saying this is the desired state, make sure that state stays in place.
So there are some downsides, but like you say, it is still a stronger solution than manual.
Definitely, way better than manual. And for a lot of people, that's the first step. That's where they go to first. They do it as a runbook, and that is a great way to do it. It's just there's always a better way to do it, right? And that's what I want to talk about, is the kind of the best way you can do this.
Cool. So you've set yourself up now. So what is the best way to do this?
Ta-da! The best way to do this. PowerShell desired state configuration, right? So what PowerShell DSC is basically a way for you to declare exactly what that state you want to match is, and say, make it so.
Right.
And you either push to certain machines to say, here's the desired state, stay in this state, or at least alert me if you go out of the state if you don't want auto-correction.
Yeah.
It's much more readable because it's just a declaration of what you want. in a PowerShell file. And then you can take that file, put it in source control, diff that file over time to see, hey, how has my configuration of my machines changed over time? And by looking at every kind of commit to your source control, you can see exactly who made what changes when. And you can do things like code review on your machine configuration before you actually push out, you know, your configuration to production. Other people can look at it as opposed to just an IT admin saying, hey, I think I want to update this config, asking their friend. There's no kind of trail, and there's no kind of formal review process to make sure exactly what I said I was going to do is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
So in terms of kind of what this looks like, if you look at the top here, the structural configuration, you can see it's much nicer about, I want to ensure that a certain Windows feature is present, and I can still parameterize that, right, if I want to. Or in this case, ensure that this website is present on the box. Versus having to write code that not just checks whether it's there, sets it to be there, does some reporting to me, and has to be idempotent in that if it needs to make sure it doesn't try to set it up if it's already set up, because then you could end up with a lot of websites on the box, or you could end up with an error when it tries to set up something that's already set up, right? So this first way, just declaring exactly what I want, is much nicer. And if we look at that exact same desired state I wanted to enforce, this is what it looks like as a PowerShell desired state configuration file. You can see it's very easy to read. I'm just saying I want to have a service running.
And you've given it the name OI service, or is that something that's specific?
So you get to define what goes here. That's kind of your essentially friendly name identifier for this rule.
Okay.
So in this case, I'm saying I want the health service, which I guess is what the MMA service is.
That is the actual name, of the agent.
Is running. And then I'm saying before I do this, I need to make sure that the package is there, right? And so the package one down here is just saying ensure that this package that contains the MMA bits is actually on the box, right? And it's giving the details on how to check that it's there, install it if it isn't there, but in a declarative way. Ensure that this package is present. This is saying ensure so this is actually installing the package.
Yeah.
So ensure the package is installed. This is the one that actually goes and makes sure the package is, the kind of MSI is there beforehand. So ensure that the bits are on the box, ensure that the package is installed, and ensure that the service is running. So I can very easily declare, hey, this is the state I want it to be in. Make the MMA agent be there, make it running, make it so.
Yeah, seems almost too easy.
Very easy.
Yeah.
And in terms of what the life cycle of these items looks like, you have that configuration file that I just showed. Here's another sample one where it's essentially just saying make sure IIS is present on the box and make sure ASP.NET is present. So a very simple one. But regardless of what it is, you take that configuration, you run one simple command to compile it into these managed object format files that the machines actually understand. And then you either push those files to the machines that should match that desired state, or you put those files on what's called a DSC pull server. And what that is a way for, you don't have to have any inbound access to these machines set up. The machines will be configured to reach out to you to say, hey, is there some configuration I should match? And it'll actually reach out to you. So it doesn't need any inbound ports or access. It just reaches out to the pull server to pull down what it needs.
So for instance, if you had your example before where you had your 1,000 servers that were manually configured essentially, and we looked at the first solution where you could configure it using PowerShell. Now we're looking at DSC. You've essentially got your 1,000 servers talking to this one, or I suppose a few, perhaps for redundancy, pull nodes. Would that be correct? And then they would say, you'd have already configured them to ask the pull node on a frequency. And then say, am I still current? If not, update me, for instance.
Exactly. What configuration should I match? It'll check every 30 minutes so that if you did change the configuration for a set of machines, it'll, without you having to remote into any machines, when you're talking about 1,000 machines, that's a lot to remote into and open ports on. They'll just check in every once in a while and say, hey, what configuration should I match? Then they'll make sure they're matching it, or report to you if you don't want autocorrection. They'll just report to you in exactly what ways they're not matching it.
Right, and I guess 1,000 servers all reporting back to one server seems like it could be a lot of network traffic, but I'm guessing it's fairly minimal. It's just a tiny piece of information.
Yeah, there's very little going over the wire. I'm sorry. It's not a very heavy load. It's just saying it's a ping every like 30 minutes to say, hey, is there something new for me to do? And then if there is, the MOF is sent down, but the MOFs aren't really huge. And another thing, and we'll kind of get to this, is if you are worried about, like you mentioned, how do I take care of redundancy and high availability for my DSC pull server, so if my single box that I'm using goes down, I don't lose my ability to manage my data center or my clouds. That's where kind of this automation DSC service comes in, which is even better than PowerShell DSC itself.
Right. So we're really building up to good, better, best, ultimate,
the ultimate,
platinum.
ultimate edition.
Right,
yes.
nice, yeah, cool. Okay,
configuration ultimate.
So we can do roles, we can do features, because I noticed on the previous slide when we had the configuration of SharePoint, it's installing IIS. The role, ASP.NET is a sub-feature or a sub-role of IIS. It can do the individual packages. I mean, but it just seems like it can do everything.
It can do a whole bunch of things: files, registry, Windows features, services, packages being installed. It can do things for Linux as well. PowerShell DSC is cross-platform, and the whole platform is extensible. So just like you can write PowerShell modules with new commandlets to call in your scripts, you can, in your PowerShell modules, create new DSC resources that take care of the details of. So Windows feature, for example, is a DSC resource, and they've taken care of, okay, assuming I have these parameters set up for me, it should be present, and here's the name of the feature to make sure it's there. It takes care of the making sure the item is there. If it's not there, saying a false to no, you're not matching the desired state and in this exact way. So all you have to worry about is declaring the state you want, and the resource kind of takes care of that imperative process of how do I make sure it's matching whatever state was passed to me.
So for instance, web server, DSC on the whole has an understanding that web server is the role of IIS. Because you called it IIS, but you could have called it something different. Is that right? On the previous slide?
IIS, that name right here is totally your choice as to what you put there.
But web server is the important, meaningful. That is actually the IIS.
Yeah, this is the kind of encode name, regardless of whether you're using DSC or PowerShell commandlets. That's the encode name for what IIS is. The IIS Windows feature is called.
So if it was Hyper-V, it would be Hyper-V.
Right.
If it was
ASP.NET, right? There's that one.
Great. So where do we go from here? So we understand the life cycle a bit more. You're going to show us some other stuff?
Well, I wanted to show you guys a sample of what DSC actually looks like to start with.
Nice.
So let's go and do that. So I have this box set up here. You can see I have this configuration that I've written on this box. It's not actually applied yet, but it's just saying make sure IIS is present, right? We're used to seeing that, and make sure these two files are present and have this contents in them, right?
Nice. Okay.
So then what I can do is actually, like I said, you have the configuration, you compile it, and then you push it or have it pulled from a pull server.
So how do you compile it? Just out of a quick question, where would you go? Do you do that in ISC as well, or?
Yes, so you can do that in the ISC or in the regular PowerShell console. I mean, this is saved into a PS1 file.
Right.
So when I run this file, that's actually going to declare simple push config as a configuration. And then down here, I just type in simple push config, and that'll actually do the compilation.
All right,
You can see that spit out a folder on our desktop called simple push config. And inside that folder is the MOF file, which will be called localhost in this case.
Right.
Let me open that up. And in this MOF file is kind of the machine understandable language of, hey, what's the state I should match? It's kind of like there's the C# file and there's the DLL file, right?
Okay, nice.
So that's that file right there. So in my next step after doing that compilation, creating these MOF config documents is to actually apply it. And I can do that with a command called start DSC configuration. And so I've kind of preset up that command, and I'll run it now. And you'll see what this is going to do is actually say, apply this configuration to this machine, and when we're done, the machine is going to have IIS installed, and it's going to have these two files present. And let me show you that these files actually don't exist right now. So you can see those two files that should be in the C directory are not there right now, right? And if I actually run this, in this case, I've been running this demo so many times in a row, I need to force it. This will actually put those files in place and make sure IIS is installed.
Right.
So this should only take a second to run because it's not doing too much here, and then I'll have that desired state configured for this server. And I could go take this and run it on as many servers as I want, just declare the desired state, and it's all set up.
Well, you've used files as an example here, but you could have been tweaking the registry, like you said, installing additional roles.
Yeah,
and
anything
features.
you want. There's a PowerShell gallery, which is kind of community content and Microsoft contributed content that doesn't ship in box for tons of other resources.
Right.
Besides the many that exist in the box. So now if I go to my local C drive, boom, you can see those two files are there. It's matching that desired state, and these files do have the content that they're supposed to have.
Okay.
So that's PowerShell DSC.
It's a good way to ensure that, like you say, files or a certain package or a certain just something exists on the system all the time. Really could be useful. Yeah.
The state that these machines should match, it gets deployed and it stays that way.
Nice. Okay, so what else do we need to know in terms of PowerShell DSC?
Sure, so that's PowerShell DSC, but again, we've been talking about better and better ways to do this. So there's manual, there's running this as a script, which is better, which I showed, and then there's PowerShell DSC, which is better, and now we're going to talk about the best, which is automation DSC.
Nice. Built it up now.
Exactly. So PowerShell DSC does a great job of making configuration management really easy for your machines, but it also introduces some items you now need to manage. There's the configuration files, which you have many of. There's these MOF files that you have many of, and there's thousands of machines that you need to either push or set up to talk to our pull server to actually pull down these configs and report to, right? And so when we're talking about thousands and thousands of machines, that ends up being a lot of configurations, a lot of MOFs, and a lot of kind of either pushing or pulling machines that need to be set up to use DSC. So some of the kind of things that DSC itself doesn't take care of is limiting access, tracking change, and orchestrating configuration changes. So limiting access is things like making sure only people who should change certain parts of configurations do change those parts of the configurations. Right. It's things like making sure a node that's reaching out to the pull server isn't able to pull down a configuration that's not assigned to it. So for example, if I have some lowly web server and I have an AD configuration on my pull server, I don't want my lowly web server, if it might get hacked, to be able to pull down my full AD configuration, which might expose some other information, right? So that kind of being able to limit access both to people and to what configuration the nodes can pull.
Yeah.
In terms of tracking changes compliance, how do I actually tell who made what changes to configurations when? How do I tell across my whole environment what machines are actually compliant with their desired state and in exactly what ways? And in terms of orchestrating configuration change, upgrade domains are very important when you're talking about deploying changes out. So how do I make sure I only apply my configuration on a per upgrade domain basis and only move on to the next upgrade domain once the last one is done? Or I might have dependencies like the database tier needs to be updated before the web service tier, right? So I need to make sure my new configuration goes out to the database tier before the web service tier, as well as respecting maintenance windows, right? Maybe I only want the new config to be pulled by machines when the machine is in a maintenance window because I don't want it going auto-correcting, which may temporarily take it down, maybe requires a machine restart while it's not in maintenance mode or in a maintenance window.
That makes sense. Well, there's a lot of things that I thought it was going all so well for PowerShell DSC, and now you've mentioned all those things, you think, oh, actually, I didn't think about those. So how do we solve those?
So we solve that with the automation DSC service, which is this great service that ships as part of Operations Management Suite, where again, you take those configurations, you compile them in our service, you import any DSC resources you want, if you want ones beyond what's shipped in the box, and then you onboard machines and say, hey, these set of machines are assigned these MOFs, these node configurations, and they will just reach up to our service, which you don't have to stand up. You know, it's not like setting up a local pull server. Instead, you just click New Automation Account, and boom, you have a pull server set up. Right. And it scales to whatever needs you have. So as the more machines that start being onboarded to it, it'll just scale to meet the exact needs you have. It's highly available and highly reliable, so you're not worried about one box going down and then suddenly you can't control configuration in your environment or see what machines are compliant. So it's this really good at-scale production configuration management service.
Right, and it's not just, obviously, your graphic with the cloud and with the endpoints that you can target there. There's Azure VM, physical server, on-prem VM. It could be Windows or Linux. I'm guessing it doesn't have to be an Azure VM. Could it be a VM in another cloud?
Just like the rest of the Operations Management Suite, all of the services, including this automation DSC service, can target Windows, can target Linux, can target on-premise VMs, OpenStack, Azure, AWS, anything else.
Right.
Wherever these machines
as long as it can reach it,
they can be managed.
Cool, nice.
In one interface.
Nice. So have we got a demo of this one?
We do have a demo.
Great.
Let's go to that demo.
Awesome.
So I'll go back to my automation portal where I ran that runbook way back in my first demo. And you can see I've written this configuration here. And this configuration, it's would produce two of these MOF files, two different roles essentially. One is saying, make sure IS is there, make sure these two files are there, and that the content of the files is there. The other one, very similar, except the files are blank, right? So I can actually go and import this into the automation service by just going to configurations, add configuration, and then I would select it, which I'm not going to navigate to, and hit import. I've actually already done that, so here it is sitting right there. And the next thing I would do is, just like I showed compiling locally, you would compile it in the service. So I'll hit compile, and that'll actually kick off a job to do that compilation, the
Generate
production of the
file.
MOFs.
Yep.
And you can see, I'll show you an example of a completed job already, but once it's done, it spits out those 2 MOF files that we have locally, and the MOFs that get spit out are according to what you name your configuration. That's kind of the namespace.
Yep.
And then whatever you define here are kind of the names of the roles, the names of these MOF node configurations,
So the
we call them.
independent node configuration.
Yeah, so web server and web server blank files, and you can see web server blank files. So in a compilation job, you can actually look at if there was an error creating, compiling it into MOFs, or whatever output or warnings, or exactly what source was used for this compilation, since the configuration gets compiled into the MOFs, and the MOFs are actually what gets assigned to the nodes.
Right.
So let's see how this job is doing.
Is there any reason why you
Starting out.
wouldn't create a ginormous configuration file with lots and lots of nodes? Because obviously you've got 2 in that particular example that you had. Could you not just create one massive one that has everything?
You could. I mean, you could do the same thing with a script, right? And it kind of gets unmanageable over time the
Fair
more
enough,
content you have in one file and the more people who need to make edits to that file.
Yep.
So modularizing it by file, where each configuration kind of maps to one service maybe, or one set of roles that kind of are related, like SharePoint might be the configuration, and in there you might have a node statement, a role for web service and worker and database tier, right? The different roles within that service.
I see. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I was just thinking, could you just have one behemoth? But
you could. Wouldn't advise it.
On the right direction.
Yeah. You can see this is running now, so it's about to complete because the compilation doesn't actually take very long.
Quite small.
Should be done. There we go. It's completed.
Right.
And you can see these MOFs, these node configurations were produced.
Yep.
And then if I actually go to my nodes, I actually had one machine already assigned to one of the node configurations MOFs that comes out of there.
Okay.
And if I'd hit refresh there, you can see, so it would be pending, which would mean there's something new on the pull server you need to pull, but you haven't pulled it yet. This machine actually happened to just check the pull server right after that, so it's in progress mode.
Right.
So if I actually go to that machine.
So just to clarify for people and myself, a node that you've got listed there is one that is actively asking for configuration optimization.
A node is essentially just a managed endpoint that's pulling configuration from the service.
Great, okay.
So you can see it's pulling down the new MOF. Since I imported the configuration, I compiled it. There might be some new config in the latest version of that configuration that the server is now pulling down. So if I go to that server and I actually force it to pull, you'll see afterwards it will be matching the desired state. It looks like it had already just pulled just because we happened to hit that 30-minute interval.
Yeah.
So I didn't even need to force it in this case.
Okay.
And of course, that desired state said make sure IS is there and make sure those 2 files are there and are blank. So you can see, boom, IS is there.
Yep.
And we have these 2 files here and they're blank, right? So boom, that desired state is there. But we also talked about how DSC and automation DSC help solve configuration drift.
Right.
So in addition to pulling config from the server, from the pull server, it'll also continually every 15 minutes run and make sure that the state is enforced. Because when I configured this machine to pull from our pull server, I said autocorrect. Make sure you're in autocorrect mode.
Right.
If anything ever changes from the desired state, set it back. You don't have to do that. You can just set it to report what ways it's not compliant. But in this case, it would set it back. So if I delete one of these files, and
could
again,
it be a delete, or could you change that file?
you could change the content in it.
If
it was a service, you might set it to stopped where the desired state says to have it running. Just some change versus the desired state.
Right.
And then I'll kick off. This will happen every 15 minutes, but I'll force a consistency check to happen now, which will say, hey, you're not matching the desired state anymore. I'm going to put you back into the desired state.
So a force of a consistency check is different from. Would force pull have the same effect though? Essentially, if we'd have run that again.
So what force pull does is it's checking the pull server to say, hey, is there any new desired state versus the desired state I had before that I should match?
Right.
Versus a consistency check is kind of independent, and that's saying of the desired state I last pulled, is the machine matching this?
Gotcha. So you wouldn't use both, you can just do one, right? Okay.
Yeah. So now if I go back here, boom, the file I deleted is back there, so it's continually matching this desired state without me having to go and do anything.
That's awesome.
And if we go back to our pull server, you can see, if I refresh this, the machine is now compliant because we know it's matching the desired state in all the ways. And I can see this status is very useful for determining, are my machines matching the state they should be in? You can see in this case, this one is not. This one tried to. It was in autocorrect mode, but failed to.
Right.
And we'll dig into that in a second. So if I click into here, you can see, boom, it's exactly compliant with the state, the desired state I said it should be
So
compliant
it
with.
lists those individual components of the MOF that we provided before.
At the resource level and the resource instance level. So for example here, this one you can see did have the Windows features it needed, but something was not compliant about the files that were supposed to be there. And if I click into file, I can see exactly this file, this is the friendly name I gave the file, is not compliant versus this one was. So I can see in exactly what ways are my machines not aligning to the desired state that they should be in.
And that one didn't have autocorrect, so because obviously autocorrect
that one was just reporting. This other machine does have autocorrect, so when it saw it wasn't matching the state, it tried to match the state, but you can see that failed. And if we click into the specific resource, we can see exactly why it failed. And in this case, it's because the requested feature Weeb server is not found on the target machine, which makes sense because there's no Windows feature called Weeb server. So of course that failed. So troubleshooting without digging
maybe in the future.
One day.
Yeah, we can request that on user voice.
But then my demo will break. So
that one will be fixed.
That'll be fixed, but my demo I won't have a failed node. So one more thing I wanted to show is, let's say the desired state for this machine changes. I no longer want it to have blank files. I want it to have IIS and files with content in them. I can easily, and all this you can do through APIs, commandlets, SDKs, as well as the portal. I can go in and say assign the node, and I can assign it to, instead of web server blank files, the node configuration it's assigned to right now, I can assign it to web server, which is the one that has, if we go back to the ISC,
populated file,
that's the one, right, that has the files populated.
Right.
And so boom, it is now done. That one's now assigned to it.
Yeah.
You can see it's in pending state because there's something new on the pull server, some new configuration the machine hasn't pulled yet, so we can tell that in the portal. And if I go back to that machine and do that force pull, again, to make it grab this new config now instead of at its regular interval of grabbing it, we'll see that once this is done, it'll say, oh, there's a new desired state for me to assume. It's different than how I was configured right now. I'm going to match that new state, which in this case means no change to IIS since that was already set up, but the files that were blank will no longer be blank.
What if you've clicked the force consistency there instead of the force pull? What would it have done?
If I had clicked that first?
Yeah, so we came into this environment, we've reassigned the alternative config to this particular node. You came here, you ran force pull to grab the latest, but if you'd have run consistency, what would have happened?
Right, so the consistency all the consistency does is check against whatever had been pulled last. So in this case, it would still be web server blank files because the last pull pulled that down. So the consistency check will continually check against that. Independently, there's another timer which is for the pull, right? Which is when it actually goes out and it pulls down potentially new desired states. So one is, are there new desired states for me to assume? And the other one is, for the desired state I should assume, am I actually matching it? And if not, I'm going to report or I'm going to autocorrect.
And now that you've pulled down the latest, the consistency check will continue to check against that one.
Exactly. Every 15 minutes it'll go and it'll make sure, because this is an autocorrect mode, that the machine is continually matching my desired state, whatever it may be.
So it's 15 minutes for consistency, and it's, did you say 30 minutes for checking the pull every 30 minutes? Or is that...
so the pull happens every 30 minutes organically. The consistency check happens every 15 minutes. These are configurable. The lowest is around, I think, 15 minutes for each, but the defaults are 15 and 30, as I mentioned. We're also working on kind of lowering those, so there's even less of a need to, in a mission critical sense, ever have to go and onto the machine and say, hey, I need you to pull now, or hey, I need you to consistency check now. So really getting those times more granular.
Cool. Great.
And you can see, boom, that desired state is there. The file is no longer blank. It is now has the contents it should have.
Nice.
And that is automation desired state configuration in the operations management suite.
It's a whirlwind. It's what you appreciate from this when you're coming at it from perhaps somebody who hasn't been as engaged in automation over time, or your idea of automation is very strict scripts that are very tied to very specific machines that have evolved over time, and someone's left the company and now that script, nobody knows how to work it. That kind of automation world. This is just a completely different world, but hopefully you appreciate what Joe's given us here is like a good, you can do some powerful stuff with PowerShell, and then you can start to introduce DSC, and that's better because of the way we can start to configure a lot of systems in one go and maintain, but it's slightly more difficult to manage than what we would get in the best option, which is the automation service.
Exactly.
So, yeah, cool stuff. Hopefully you found that useful. I find it incredibly useful, and there's loads of other resources that you've done as well. There's some other stuff on MVA, and we'll get the links as well for the things you've done in Build and Ignite, or you can search the Channel 9 website for Joe. You'll find loads of content there where we've got more time. He's got more time to go through lots more of this stuff as well.
Sure.
But hopefully you found that useful. Thank you.